Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to the long-awaited, long-overdue, deep thought library tour. I know I've been promising this video for months now, and every time I go to make it, I keep thinking, oh, there's just a couple more books I want to get from my shelves before I show everybody. And then I go out, I order those books, I put them on my shelves, and I go, oh, there's a couple more books that I want to get before I show everybody. So finally, I've bucked up. I'm going to do it. I got to about 600 books recently, which is a nice round number. And my shelves are looking pretty clean, pretty organized, at least to myself. My shelves might not make sense to everybody, but that's okay as long as your shelves make sense to your shelf. That's what matters, as long as it makes sense to you, right? So you guys are probably wondering, how am I going to go about doing my library tour video today? Because if you're like me, you probably watch a lot of library tour videos on YouTube. They're a great way of, getting inspired and figuring out what exactly you want to get for your shelves. How do you want your library to look? And that's obviously why I'm making this video today. Probably wondering, how am I going to go about doing it? Because there's a lot of library tour videos where the video quality is not great or the audio quality is not great. They have shaky cameras or whatnot, and that's not really what book tours are about. It's about the books that you have and the passion that you have for them. But I hope that my high quality camera and my decent mic here help make this video a little bit more watchable. But I find that some people, when they do library tours, they only talk about certain books and they gloss over other ones, or they don't even mention them. Or they just mention all the spines and they never talk about any of the books in any detail. So what I'm going to do today, and hopefully this appeases my audience, is I'm going to put up images on screen of my library, because I can't even fit all of my books in the frame here. So I'll put up an image right now of what the whole library looks like. And I'll go through and I'll put up images of each of the shelves as I talk about them. I'll read off every single book on the shelf. So I'll read off every single spine in my collection today. And then I'll talk a little bit about my favorite books on each shelf, because if I were to talk in detail about every single book that I own today, this video would be 10 hours long, and I don't want to subject you guys to that. That would be torture. I'm just going to talk about my favorites today. And then at the very end of the video, I'm going to give you guys some tips and tricks for building a library of your own. If you guys watch these library tour videos, hopefully my video and hopefully other videos inspire you to build a library of your own. It's important to have physical copies, especially in today's day and age with AI and stuff like that. You never know what's going to get changed on the internet. So I think it's important to have physical copies of the greatest pieces of art of all time, of your favorite books. And it's great to pass down to your children, to your children's children. It can go down the generations and you can build a true legacy. And it might not, your children might not appreciate it, your grandchildren might not appreciate it, but somebody down the line might, and you might facilitate the next great mind in your family, the next great writer, the next great genius. They might utilize your library. So build something now and start young, because I'm 24 years old. I started building my library. The majority of the books that I have, I collect in the last 4 years, and I don't make a ton of money. I don't do YouTube full time. Hopefully I can someday, so don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends to help boost this channel in the algorithm. So hopefully I can do this someday full time, but I don't make a ton of money, and I've been able to collect a library like this. So I'm going to give you guys tips and tricks for finding cheap books, free books, books online, good audiobooks, good free audiobooks. That can be hard to find sometimes. So hopefully those tools help you guys out at the end of the video, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that. And don't forget to, like I said, like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you guys like this video. I also make why you should read videos on my channel, so every single book you see on the shelves behind me will eventually have a why you should read video on my channel, which is basically a spoiler-free video. Why you should read the book. I'll give you a little summary of the book, a little bit of background about the author. I'll give you guys some additional literature for other books that you might want to branch off and read after the book that I'm recommending. I'll also have some films, some documentaries that go along with the book that kind of help, get you deeper into it. I'll give you guys some music sometimes when it's appropriate, or paintings I'll put up on screen. So my why you should read videos are jammed packed with information, and hopefully they inspire you guys to read more books. That's a huge goal on my channel, is to inspire young people, especially young men, to go and read more books. So I'll also be having book analysis videos on my channel at some point in the future, when I can probably do it full time, because I want to do them perfect. I want to make them masterpieces. I want to make them ultimate guides to the greatest books of all time. If I'm going to take on Lord of the Rings and do a book analysis video for it, it can't be half an hour long. It can't even be an hour long or an hour and a half. It needs to be at least 10 hours long for me to go through the entire trilogy and do it justice. So I want to bring you guys videos like that at some point in the future. So like I said, if you guys enjoy this video, if you guys enjoy what I do on this channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends to show your support. So yeah, with that all out of the way, let's dive into my bookshelves. As I said before, not all my shelves are actually in frame right now, so I'll put up an image on screen that kind of shows all of my bookshelves. And that's actually not all the books that I have. So I have a little cubby over here to the right where I have a little chessboard on it and a plant. I'll put an image up on screen as well. I have a few books in there. They're kind of larger books, like picture books, dictionaries, stuff like that. So I'll go over those as well. And then I do have books in front of me here underneath my TV as well, because I have too many books. I'm overflowing right now. I'm going to have to either find another place for another shelf, or stuff's going to just start piling up, because there's no way I'm going to stop collecting books even if I run out of room. I'll start sleeping on books before I stop collecting books. So I'll show you guys everything. I'll show you guys what's underneath my TV as well. But we'll start with my right here. I think your guys is left. We'll start at that end. We'll start with the top shelf. We'll work our way down, and then we'll go to the next shelf over, top shelf, work our way down. So that's how we'll move through my shelves today. So let's start with the first shelf over here on, again, my right. I guess your guys is left or whatever it is. And on the first shelf, we have the Russians. Oh, I love the Russians. I love Russian literature. And this is the bulk of it. It's not all of my Russian literature. I do have it collected across many shelves, but this is one full shelf of Russian literature. Starting off at the far left here, we have Leo Tolstoy, The Master. I have War and Peace collected across 3 volumes. I also have Anna Karenina. We have Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy. I do have the full series, the full Foundation series, which I'll show you guys in a second here. I have Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. I have Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago. Nikolai Gogol's Dead Souls. And then we have a collection of Dostoevsky here. Notes from a Dead House, The Double and the Gambler, The Idiot, Crime and Punishment, Notes from Underground, The Adolescent, Demons, and The Brothers Karamazov. And at the very end, we have The Master and Margarita, which is a very underrated book. Very funny book, very weird book. I love that one a lot. Obviously, Dostoevsky is probably my favorite writer of all time. He's at least in the top 5. You know, he's right there with like Tolkien and a couple other writers that I'll talk about in a second here. But so yeah, I love Dostoevsky, and eventually I will collect every novel that you see there in the Everyman hardback editions. They're just about $40 a pop Canadian, so eventually I'll get around to that, but I started out with the paperback versions, and I really like the Piotr Volokhonsky translations. I know there's the Constant Garnett translation. There's a couple other ones that I've read. To me, the ones that capture the Russian spirit and the Russian essence the most are the Piotr Volokhonsky versions. I have a very faint grasp on the Russian language. I'm trying to learn it right now, but I don't have any Russian speakers around me, so it's difficult. But I have a very faint grasp on the language, and for me, I prefer this translation. But that's coming from somebody who doesn't really know Russian, so take that for what it's worth. But I like those translations, and yeah, that's my shelf of Russian literature. If I had to name you guys a favorite book on that shelf, I think I've mentioned this before, but my favorite book from Dostoevsky is Crime and Punishment. It cuts deep, cuts right to my soul, and I relate a lot to Raskolnikov. Out of all the Dostoevsky characters, that's the one that speaks to me the most for some reason. I don't know what that says about me, but maybe I'll analyze that in another video. I also love The Brothers Karamazov and Anna Karenina, so those would probably be my top 3, although picking a favorite from a shelf of Russian literature for me is like absolutely impossible. So if you held a gun to my head, I would just say, pull the trigger, because there's no way I'm picking a favorite when it comes to Russian literature. There's so many great classics out there, and I recommend you guys read every single book that you see on that shelf. Every single one is a 10 out of 10 masterpiece to me. So let's move on to the next shelf. Next up is my sci-fi shelf, and this is not all of my sci-fi books. I have a couple more scattered across my shelves, but this is one shelf of just sci-fi novels, and it's my most decorated shelf. So you can see there's a Star Trek book that's kind of propping up some other books. I know that's an eyesore to some people, so I apologize for having a book horizontal and then other books on top of it. I know some people hate that, but they're my shelves. I'm going to build them how I want, so I don't care. And they looked kind of good there with the Star Trek book, and then you have like the deck of cards and the little communicator next to it. If you're wondering why I have so much Star Trek stuff, it's because, yes, I am a huge fan of both the original series and Next Generation. I also love Deep Space Nine. Enterprise, not so much. Voyager's got some good episodes, but not my favorite. I'm not like the biggest Star Trek buff out there, but I have watched the original series and Next Generation multiple times over. I'm a big fan of the show, so that's why I have a little bit of Star Trek stuff there. And then on the very right, you can see my Mandalorian and Baby Yoda, or Grogu. I guess he has a name now, but yeah, I also love Star Wars, just equally as much, if not more. So starting on the very far left there, we have Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. I have I, Robot by Asimov, William Gibson's Neuromancer, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. I have Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I have Kirk Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-5, Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey, Dan Simmons' Hyperion, and then here is my full collection of Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. All 7 books are collected there, and then at the very end we have all 6 books of Frank Herbert's Dune. So yeah, I love every single book on that shelf. I am deeply obsessed with sci-fi. I read sci-fi all the time. I don't have enough Philip K. Dick on my shelf. I know some people will be screaming in the comment sections like, you only have Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Like, where's Ubik? Where's all the other good stuff? Eventually, I'll collect all of Philip K. Dick. I'm just waiting to save up some money to buy like his collected works on hardback. He's one of my favorite science fiction writers of all time. I also obviously love Asimov. I think he's the hardest working writer maybe in history. I think he wrote somewhere between 400 and 500 books in his life, like just a ridiculous output. He didn't really have ghostwriters like other writers with prolific outputs like Alexander Dumas. He had some assistants with writing his books. Isaac Asimov didn't let anybody touch his work, and he just cranked out high-level science fiction at a rate that nobody else has ever done and probably never will. I'd say probably like 90% of Isaac Asimov's work is like solid science fiction, like high-level stuff that I would recommend reading. So it's not like most of it's crap and just some of it's good, like I, Robot and Foundation. So Isaac Asimov, to me, he's like the giant. He's maybe the GOAT. I don't know if you can say that there's a greatest of all time when it comes to science fiction, but he's definitely in the top 3, top 5. Frank Herbert. Love Frank Herbert. I actually haven't read all of the Dune books yet. I'm on God Emperor of Dune right now, so eventually I'll work through that one and I'll finish the Dune series. The first 3 books I absolutely loved, and they're very strong. I've been told that the series falls off a little bit in the last 3 books, so that's why I took a little bit of a break from Dune, but I absolutely love the world that Frank Herbert's built. And yeah, there's so many great science fiction books on this shelf. I could talk about them all day. My favorite science fiction book of all time is actually not on this shelf. It's on a different shelf. So I'll talk about my favorite science fiction book of all time in a second here, but that kind of concludes my science fiction shelf. I love this shelf because it's nice and colorful. It's got a few props on it. Most of my shelves don't, so yeah, it's a nice lively little shelf there. Let's move on to the third one. And on the third shelf, we have some of the most beautiful spines in my entire collection, the connecting spines of the absolute masterpiece of a manga series, Vagabond. I have so much love for this series. I mean, Miyamoto Musashi, when I read his book, The Book of Five Rings, when I was a young teenager, deep into martial arts, that book inspired me so much. I named my cat Mia after Miyamoto Musashi. She's a girl, and I still kind of found a way to name her after Miyamoto Musashi somehow. But I love the Samurai trilogy with Toshiro Mifune. I think those films are fantastic. And when I eventually came across Vagabond and I started, actually picking up manga and not just giving into the stigma of, oh, manga is lame. If you read manga, you're a loser. I used to be one of those guys in high school. Then I eventually started picking up manga, and then I was the guy telling everybody around me, you need to read manga, you need to watch anime. I became that annoying guy. So you eventually get bit by the bug, and you realize that Japan has some of the most beautiful masterpieces of content ever made, and especially in the form of manga. Like, there's something about it. There's something about comic books that don't use color, that use shadows and illustrations on a level that I don't think anybody else does. Manga artists, they work themselves to death. Like like often. There's a lot of cases of it, and we'll talk about one in a short while here. But man, I have so much respect for the artists, and some people say, you know, like, I don't really want to read a comic book that's backwards. You'll get over that pretty quickly. Once you get used to it, it's easy to get used to. But some people say, well, I don't want to read a comic book that doesn't have any color. And when I compare my Marvel comics and my DC comics, and I'll show you guys those collections in a second here, but when I compare those to my manga, there's a level of detail in the illustrations that you just can't get from American comic books. So I have a deep love and appreciation for manga, and Vagabond is in my top 2. It's like tied for number 1 with another series that I also collect, which I'll show you guys in a second, and I'm sure many of you guys can guess it, but I love Vagabond. It's a fantastic story, and it kind of fictionalizes the life of Miyamoto Musashi in a very deep way. You know, the philosophy throughout this series has changed my life, and I think it's really grown me as a man. And yeah, I'm gonna make a bunch of videos on Vagabond in the future, because it's something that I could talk about all day long. And then on the very end there, you see From Hell, the definitive or the master edition, and Watchmen by Alan Moore. So to me, Alan Moore is the greatest comic book writer of all time. You know, he's like the Kentaro Miura of American comic books. I think he's kind of the GOAT, and his works have changed me. You know, Watchmen, I remember reading that for the first time and thinking, man, I've never come across any piece of superhero content that's even remotely as realistic, as dark, gritty, down to earth, relatable. Oh, there's so many adjectives I want to throw on Watchmen. It's a life-changing piece of media. I mean, I love the Zack Snyder film. I think it's a fairly decent adaptation. I know it gets some hate, but I love Watchmen. I love that universe. I love the worlds that Alan Moore builds. From Hell is such an underrated comic book. If there's one comic book I think you should pick up if you've never read it, it's From Hell. It's literally a masterpiece on par with Watchmen. I think it's equally as good, if not better. Like, it's seriously a deep work of fiction, a psychological masterpiece. And yeah, I could talk about Alan Moore all day long as well. So I'll probably eventually make a video on him, because I think he's a very underrated artist. And yeah, I just love this shelf. I love those 2 beautiful spines by Alan Moore. Those books really pop out. They're really nice hardcovers. And then the Vagabond series is just absolutely beautiful to look at those spines and how they all connect with all your favorite characters. I eventually will get the definitive versions of Vagabond, because I want the biggest volumes possible to see the beautiful art. Vagabond has some of the most beautiful art I've ever come across in my life. And yeah, I will eventually get the definitive version, so I'll eventually have 2 copies of Vagabond in the future, but that's okay. I absolutely love the series, and I want to show my love for it by collecting it fully. So yeah, there's no anime for Vagabond, unfortunately. If you want to engage with the story, you have to go out and read it, but I highly recommend it, especially if you're not somebody who's really into manga or anything like that. I would start with something like this, because I found that getting into seinen manga, which there's shonen, which is kind of more the kids stuff, and then seinen is more of the adult stuff. I found getting into the more adult content was a little bit easier for me. So if you're kind of new to manga or anime, maybe look for some of the more adult content and get in that way, because some of the more mature storylines are definitely gripping. So let's move on to the next shelf. And on the next shelf, we have the writer that got me into reading. Not really, you know, I was reading before reading Stephen King, obviously, but he's kind of the writer that got me into like passionately reading for myself and going out and taking thick novels out from the library instead of just comic books. He was that writer that really pushed me into the non-visual realm of reading. You know, put the comic books aside and just dive into the pages of a book and let your imagination paint the pictures for yourself. And Stephen King is a great writer for that, because he's brought in my imagination to some dark places, like I'm sure he has for many of you watching. He's probably my most collected writer. This is just shelf 1. I have 2 shelves of Stephen King. You can see at the very end there, I have a little bit of Thomas Harris. So every book on this shelf goes like this. Full Dark, No Star, Thinner, Cujo, The Green Mile, Different Seasons, which is Stand By Me. That's what that is. Bag of Bones, The Stand, Misery. We have the first 4 books of the Dark Tower series. I've only read the first 4. I haven't read past that yet. I don't really want to, because I'd have to pick up the first 4 again. It's been like 10 years since I've read them, so I'd have to go back to the start of the series, and I don't really have an interest in doing that myself. Unless you guys think volume 5 or whatever is like the best thing ever, you guys can let me know down below in the comments. But then I have Carrie, The Shining, and then, like I said at the end there, we have Thomas Harris's 3 books. We have The Silence of the Lambs, Red Dragon, and Hannibal. I don't have Hannibal Rising because I've heard he was kind of pressured into making that book, and it doesn't really live up to the quality as the first 3, or at least the first 2. Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs are some of my favorite horror books of all time. So Thomas Harris and Stephen King hold a special place in my heart. I don't think I'll ever get rid of these books. A lot of them are damaged and beat up, not because I read them a lot as a child. They're actually secondhand copies that I picked up to add to my shelf. A lot of the Stephen King that I read as a child was from the library, so I didn't have physical copies of my own of them. So in the past few years, I've gone out and just kind of gotten secondhand copies of my favorite books. As long as they're not marked up or missing pages or heavily annotated, I don't really care buying secondhand books. So if you see any books that are heavily beat up in my shelves, it's because they're secondhand. I take very, very good care of my books. I don't even like breaking the spines. I don't like bending pages, anything. I don't want any damage to my books. So if there's any books on my shelf that look pristine and they look brand new, they've probably been read a couple times. I just take good care of them. If there's any books that are cracked, spines are broken, anything like that, they're secondhand books that I've picked up because I'm just trying to collect the most books as possible. I don't really care. If it's cheap and it's in good shape, I'll buy it. So that's my first shelf of Stephen King. Let's move on to the second shelf. On my second shelf of Stephen King, we actually kick it off with House of Leaves, which is a book that broke my brain the first time that I read it. It shattered my mind. I think it's probably the most horrifying book I've ever read in my life. Now, you have to suspend a little bit of disbelief and, let yourself get whisked away into the insanity of that book, but it's I think it's a masterpiece. And I think if you want to know what I think fiction wise, because we'll talk about my non-fiction horror shelves in a second here, but fiction wise, if you asked me what the most terrifying novel I've ever read is, House of Leaves would definitely be up there. But for Stephen King, we also have Dr. Sleep, The Dark Half, 11/22/63, Hard in Atlantis, Under the Dome, Duma Key, It, Mr. Mercedes, Skeleton Crew, Salem's Lot, The Girl Who Loved Tom Ford, and Pet Sematary. So out of all of my Stephen King books, if you were to ask me which ones were my favorite, and I used to have more Stephen King than this, actually. I used to have probably double the amount. I used to have almost every single novel that he has, but I got rid of most of the weak ones. Even the Girl That Loved Tom Ford there, I'll probably get rid of that one eventually if I pick up another horror novel for my shelves, just because I'm trying to get rid of what's not absolutely necessary. The books that I'm going to come back and reread and the books that I want my children to read. There are some books from Stephen King that I've read that I'm like, a little bit weaker. I don't know if I'll ever reread this, so I'll probably throw it away. I don't know if I would recommend this to anybody, so I've shrunken down my Stephen King collection a bit, but I still have quite a bit. And like I said, my favorites were probably, this is so boring and basic, guys, I'm sorry, but it's The Shining, Salem's Lot, and It. I mean, that's what everybody says, really. I like Pet Sematary as well, but again, that's another generic pick. I really like Dr. Sleep. Maybe that's an interesting pick because that was the sequel to The Shining, and I remember reading that when it came out and just being so excited about it. I'm like, I hope this gets adapted into a movie, and then it was, and then the movie was better than I expected. It wasn't actually horrible. It was a decent film. So yeah, I love Stephen King. I got some great memories with him. Like I said, he was kind of the writer that got me into reading heavily, to picking out those big bricks of novels out at the library and diving into those worlds. And yeah, a lot of these books I'll come back and reread probably soon here, because it's been about almost 10 years now since I went through my first like Stephen King binge as a child. I was probably 13, 14, 15 years old when I really started getting into him. So yeah, let's move on to the next bookshelf. We'll move on to the next whole shelving unit. And at the top of my next shelf, we have a bunch of assorted classics. Not really any rhyme or reason to this shelf, but we have Gone with the Wind, Bram Stoker's Dracula. I have The Stranger by Albert Camus, Fahrenheit 451, Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, Fear of Loathing in Las Vegas, Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, Solaris by Stanislav Lem. We have The Catcher in the Rye, The Painted Bird, Fight Club, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, American Psycho, The Trial by Franz Kafka. We have The Road, No Country for Old Men, and Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Absalom, Light in August, The Sound and the Fury, and As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. So yeah, a lot of American classics on there and a lot of books that have been turned into films. Obviously Dracula, many times, like 20 times. Gone with the Wind, one of the greatest films of all time. The Handmaid's Tale is a great TV series. You have Solaris, which is one of my favorite sci-fi films of all time. In fact, that's the book I was referencing earlier when I said, my favorite sci-fi books on another shelf is actually Solaris. That's my favorite sci-fi book of all time. I also love Roadside Picnic. I don't have it on my shelves at the moment, but I will get it eventually. But I like Solaris the most. I think about it often, and I love the Tarkovsky adaptation of it. It's one of my favorite films of all time. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, obviously. Terry Gilliam, I think, directed that one. Johnny Depp is brilliant in it. And Benicio del Toro. It's a fantastic film. I highly recommend it. I don't have all of Hunter S. Thompson's works at the moment. I just have Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but I have read quite a bit of his works, and I want to collect them all eventually. He's one of my favorite writers of all time. What else on this shelf? The Painted Bird is like one of the most underrated novels ever written. Fight Club is an absolute thrill. I highly recommend it, especially if you love the movie. The book is just as intense, just as action-packed, and just as much of a page-turner as the film is, gripping. So I highly recommend the book as well. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is phenomenal. American Psycho, obviously, is a fantastic book. Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite writers of all time. Blood Meridian is like really high up on my list. I love the violence and just the evil that's depicted in that book. I've read it a couple times now, and I meditate on it often. And Faulkner, oh man, if you don't read, they don't really make you read Faulkner in high school anymore, I feel like, and it's a shame because I don't know, people find him difficult or something. Faulkner, you need to read Faulkner. His prose are so poetic and beautiful, and he's such a unique writer. Yeah, every single book on this shelf is fantastic. Like I said, I could talk about all of them forever, but I'll move on from this the shelf of American classics and books that have been adapted into amazing films. On the next shelf, we have a little bit more of the same, kind of assorted classics and not too much rhyme or reason to this shelf either. But on the very end, we have The Secret Garden, and then I have Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. I don't have The Fountainhead yet, but I will get it eventually. I have John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath and East of Eden. I have Catch-22. I have Faust by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. That's always a fun name to say. 100 Years of Solitude, James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, and Ulysses. I have A Clockwork Orange, The Left Hand of Darkness, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The Plague, and The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell. Very underrated book by George Orwell. If you've read Animal Farm in 1984 and you haven't read Road to Wigan Pier, definitely go pick that one up. It's very short, doesn't take too long. Albert Camus, one of my favorite writers of all time. I'll make a video on him shortly, so I won't talk too much about him. Ken Kesey, absolute lunatic. Absolutely love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The book is actually more wild and depraved than the film is. So if you love the film and you want to go even deeper, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a phenomenal book. The Left Hand of Darkness obviously is a sci-fi book that's a little bit out of place there, but fantastic read. A Clockwork Orange, again, if you love the movie, the book reads just as well. It has a very unique style to how the narrator tells the story. He uses like a very weird vocabulary, and I love reading that book. It's so much fun. James Joyce is definitely a headache. Ulysses is great. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. I love reading Ulysses, but Finnegan's Wake is like hitting my head against a door. It's that's probably the most difficult work of fiction that I own, and I think pretty much everybody who's ever touched it would probably agree with that. There are like completely made up words, run-on sentences, and yeah, it's a genius book. Like, it really is brilliant, and it takes time to get through. You need to read like multiple commentaries at the same time as you're reading it. But if you can work your way through Finnegan's Wake, it's a very, very special book. It's probably the most unique book ever written. It's like up there, like House of Leaves, like I mentioned earlier. That's another one that's like a very, very unique book, because you have, sentences that are running off the page, and there's a book within a book, and it's very complicated, and the writer's going insane as he's writing it. And anyways, I don't want to spoil House of Leaves for anybody who hasn't read it, but House of Leaves, Finnegan's Wake, these are some of the most unique books that I've ever touched in my life. Speaking of unique books, I'll hop to the other side there. Infinite Jest is a very unique book. It's kind of just a I don't know what you would call it, like the ramblings of a mad genius philosopher who was lost. I don't know. David Foster Wallace is a very unique character. I've watched his interviews multiple times. Like, not just multiple times, like 10 or 20 times I've watched his interviews just over and over and over again. There's something about his charisma, something about the honesty in how he speaks about the world. He's very down to earth, and just he feels grounded and connected. And there's just something about listening to that man speak, and then also, reading his great work, Infinite Jest, that just, I don't know, I relate a lot to him. And obviously sad how his life ended, and obviously there's a lot of things that I disagree on him on, like religiously, that I think ended up leading him towards that dark path, that he ended up taking his life at, I think, like 40 or 50 years old. He was very young when he left this world. And David Foster Wallace is an absolute force. And if you don't want to pick up that absolute brick of a book that is Infinite Jest, I would definitely highly recommend checking out his interviews on YouTube. Just hearing him talk about David Lynch, I could listen to him ramble about David Lynch forever, and just how self-conscious he is throughout all of the interviews. He's just like, oh man, I shouldn't be talking about this. Like people don't want to hear me talk. And it's just like, no, I literally want to hear 10 hours of you just rambling about David Lynch. It's so interesting to me. So David Foster Wallace is a very unique character, and I'll make some videos on him in the future, because he's an enigma that's hard to crack. And yeah, I hope to be a useful guide to getting into his works in the future, because he's sometimes neglected. Infinite Jest is a massive book. Some people say it's the book that splits up friendships, because once you read it, you want your other friend to read it, but then they will never read it, and then you're connected deeply to this book, and it can kind of split up. I've heard that before, and I sense some truth to that, but what else is on my shelf there? Well, like I said, Ayn Rand. I don't have The Fountainhead yet, but I will get it eventually. I like her works. Obviously, I don't agree with her on everything, but I find her very useful. John Steinbeck, Catch-22, fantastic. And then in the middle there is my favorite play of all time. I put it above Shakespeare, man. There's something about Goethe. There's something about Faust. There's something about that story, the selling your soul to the devil, making that pact for eternal glory and prosperity and infinite knowledge and all of that. There's something about it that just rings true and speaks to my soul, and I connect with it on such a deep level. So I love Faust very, very deeply, and I'll obviously make many, many videos on it at some point in the future. So let's move on to the next shelf. And on my next shelf, we have kind of, some religious texts. We have some theology, some philosophy. This shelf is fairly congruent. I think it makes a little bit of sense. So on the very end there, we have John Milton's Paradise Lost. Then we have The Art of War Illustrated, which is a fantastic book. I'll take it out at the end of the video and kind of show you guys. I'll show you guys all of my most beautiful books at the end of the video, and I'll take them out and show them on camera a little bit, because that one's really beautiful. And so is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Both of those are just gorgeous books, and I found them at Indigo for like $20 Canadian, which would be like $4 American. I'm just joking, but sometimes it feels like that. Then I have the collected works of Shakespeare there, the Wordsworth editions. Those are fantastic hardcovers. I actually found those at a thrift shop, perfect condition. Cost me $2 Canadian to buy 3 beautiful hardcover versions of Shakespeare that had never been touched. And they have the little bookmarks in there. They're beautiful copies. Then I have the Holy Bible, the King James Version. I have the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Book of Mormon there. So I'm not Muslim. I'm not Mormon. I would consider myself Catholic, so I should probably have a Douay Rheims Bible, but I read out of the King James. I don't actually read out of that King James Bible. A quick little rant here about my religious beliefs. If you guys don't want to hear this, you guys can skip ahead 2 minutes. But when I was growing up, I grew up in a Catholic household. I went to a Catholic school, went to a Catholic church. I eventually fell away from religion. 13, 14, 15 years old, I became an atheist, and I was completely gone from religion. I eventually became an agnostic. I opened up to religion. I had a couple religious experiences, and I was kind of looking. I was completely open to anything. I wanted to take all of the religions seriously. I wanted to give them all a fair shake, and I wanted to make up my mind completely void of any influence. So what I did is I went on Amazon and I bought that King James version. I bought that Quran. I bought that Bhagavad Gita. I found that Book of Mormon at a thrift store. Funny enough, I couldn't find a nice copy online, or they were out of stock or something. So I found that one at a thrift store, and I took those 4 books and a couple other religious books that I'll show you guys in a second here, because they're not all on the same shelf. And I kind of just went through all of them, and I wanted to decide for myself, like, which religion speaks the most to me, which one do I find the most connection to. And I found that the words in the King James Holy Bible to me were the most beautiful. I came back to Christianity, and then after many years of contemplating, the Protestant side, the Orthodox side, the Catholic side, what do they all believe? How do they differ? I eventually converged on Catholicism. So that's the arguments that I'm the most convinced of. And really what brought me back to Catholicism was not just growing up as a Catholic, but I looked around the world at the most beautiful churches in the world, from the most beautiful mosques to the most beautiful Orthodox churches to the most beautiful Catholic churches. And to me, there's something about St. Peter's Basilica and the great cathedrals that have been built across Europe. There was something about the beauty of Catholic churches that to me just stood a little bit above the absolutely gorgeous Orthodox churches and the stunning mosques that I've seen across the globe. There was just something that stood a little bit above for me with the Catholic churches. Again, that's completely subjective, but there was something about the Vatican that just spoke to me, and I'm like, that beauty, that shines forth the truth. That shows me the truth in some way. So I kind of connected myself to Catholicism, and now I would consider myself a Catholic. But this channel will never be a Catholic channel. I'll promise you that now, and I don't think that will ever change, because I never want to argue from a Catholic point of view or a Christian point of view. I always want to come from a middle ground and to approach it like a philosopher, like somebody who's trying to learn. I never want to argue one side or stand and plant my heels on this side and be like, that side's wrong, I'm going to argue from this side. I always want to be somewhere in the middle and try to draw perspectives from all sides. So you can never expect this to be like a Catholic or a Christian channel. This will always be a philosophy channel first. So keep that in mind. But yeah, I've read the Quran, I've read the Bhagavad Gita, I read the Book of Mormon. I wasn't convinced of the Book of Mormon, and the Quran, I'm reading an English translation, so keep that in mind. I'm not going to read it in the original Arabic. I struggle to keep a grasp on 5 languages as it is. There's no way I can learn Arabic. I'm not that smart. If I did, maybe I would find some beauty in reading the Quran, and maybe I would connect to it on a deeper level. But for me, I just didn't see the same beauty from reading that English translation of the Quran as I did from reading the King James version. So that's probably because I'm an English speaker, and I grew up English, French, German. That's kind of my ancestry. So that's just what I connect to. But again, everybody's free to have their own religious beliefs. You don't have to be a Catholic or a Christian to be on my channel. Like I just said, this will always be a philosophy channel first. So that's my little spiel on religion and my religious books there. And then we have a bunch of samurai philosophy, because when I was an atheist, that's kind of what I attached myself to. I'm like, religion's stupid, but you know what I'm going to believe? Bushido and all this samurai philosophy, and that's what I'm going to commit to. So you could tell that I was a complete martial art nut at the time. So I have a book there on the samurai. It's kind of a history book on them. Secret Tactics, Bosho. I apologize to my Japanese speakers out there. I really do, but I suck at pronouncing words. Bosho Shu, Budo Shoshinshu. Budo Shoshinshu? Oh, I apologize, guys. That's a horrible pronunciation, but That book's fantastic as well. I have a ninja book, a samurai book. I have the Book of Five Rings there by Miyamoto Musashi. Obviously, I said before that book has been hugely influential to me. And I have the Egyptian Book of the Dead there. And on the very end, I know you can't see the spine. There's no lettering on the spine, but it's the Sithatra by Hermann Hesse. So that's kind of my works of philosophy, samurai philosophy, theology, some religious texts there. So I'm always trying to engage with different ideas from around the world and different religious ideas. I'm constantly trying to read, Hindu theology and philosophy, and what do they believe, and what do the Buddhists believe, and what do my Muslim brothers believe, what do my Orthodox brothers believe. I want to know what everybody's getting at and where they find truth. So I'm always trying to find truth for myself, and I've found that the King James Bible speaks the most to me. And like I said, towards the end of the video, I'll show you guys the King James version that I read out of, because it's my most expensive book by far, and it's beautiful. So I'll show you guys that one at the very end. But yeah, we'll wrap up there for that shelf. Moving on, my next shelf is my most difficult shelf to read by far. These are the most difficult works that I think I've collected, and they're kind of all on one shelf there. They kind of all fit neatly together. Now, once I start collecting physics, that will start to be my most difficult shelf. When I start to get Dirac on my own, I have PDF versions of some of my favorite physics textbooks and books of all time, but I haven't collected the physical copies yet, because collecting physics textbooks and great works of physics tends to get pretty expensive. But eventually, when I collect physics, that would probably be my most difficult shelf. That's what I read that's the most difficult to me, is physics. But past that, just underneath that would be the philosophy of Heidegger, Schopenhauer, and Hegel. So obviously I have Heidegger there on the end, Being and Time, a phenomenal work of philosophy. Then I have Mircea Eliade's History of Religious Ideas, all 3 volumes. I have Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation, volumes 1 and 2. Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. And then I have, 6 books there of Carl Jung. So I have kind of his most popular works there. We have The Undiscovered Self, Man and His Symbols, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, the Psychology of the Unconscious, The Red Book, and Modern Man in Search of a Soul. I'll show you guys the Red Book at the very end, because it's a beautiful book, some fantastic illustrations in there, and the leather on it is just, I love it. That's kind of what I have from Jung so far, are just kind of his popular works. Eventually, I'll collect his complete collected works, but again, it's like $1,000 to collect the complete collected works of Jung. So eventually I'll get around to that. I have read the collected works of Jung, but again, through PDF versions, through audiobooks, which I'll show you guys where I found the audiobooks for that at the end of the video, because there's a fantastic YouTube channel right now that's cranking out all of the audiobooks for the collected works of Jung, and it's a fantastic resource. And then at the very end there, I have Gray's Anatomy. So it's kind of a shinier copy. Again, I'll probably show you guys that book at the end, because it's quite beautiful, but it's like an older version. It's not like the updated version that medical students would use. I do have a copy of that, again, as a PDF on my phone, but for just casual use, I just use that version. It's a really nice one. It's got the gilded edges and the nice little bookmark, and it's got the original illustrations in it. So I'm always trying to learn more about the human body and anatomy, and I'm not trying to become a surgeon. I have no dreams or aspirations of working in medicine at all, but I'm always trying to learn more about the world, and learning about anatomy is a big part of that. So I have Gray's Anatomy's textbook for that reason. So yeah, this is probably my most difficult shelf. You got Jungian psychology, which can be difficult at times. Anatomy is difficult for me because I'm not a medical student. It's not kind of my natural thing that I'm engaged with. And then some very deep works of philosophy there from Heidegger, Hegel, Schopenhauer. Those are often considered some of the most difficult works of philosophy of all time, and they've taken me a long time to work through. So yeah, a very difficult shelf there until I start collecting physics, because I have some physics books that I'll show you guys in a second here, but not nearly as much as how much I read in physics. I'm constantly reading physics, not because I want to become a physicist or that I think I'll ever become an expert in physics. I'm pretty stupid when it comes to physics. To be completely honest with you guys, a lot of it I don't understand. A lot of it I need ChatGPT and other people to break it down for me, because I really don't understand what I'm reading, but I keep chipping away at it, and I want to understand it. So yeah, let's move on to the next shelf. And switching it up completely again with this next shelf, my shelves, they just differ so much from shelf to shelf, and that's really gonna show in these next couple ones. But this next shelf is kind of assorted biographies. I don't know. At the end here, I have Freud by Peter Gay. It's kind of the best Freud biography ever written. I highly recommend it if you want to learn more about Freud. Then we have Ingrid Bergman's My Story. Fantastic biography. I really love her story. I also have John Cleese's biography, I have Ingmar Bergman's biography, and Kubrick's biographies. So a couple of my favorite filmmakers there, Ingmar Bergman and Stanley Kubrick, are both two of the greatest directors of all time. John Cleese, I love Monty Python. It's one of my favorite comedy shows and just troupes ever formed. I love Ingrid Bergman. I think she's probably one of the most, if not the most underrated actress of all time. And moving on past that, we kind of get into my martial arts books. So eventually this will probably be a full martial arts shelf. I just haven't collected all the boxing and MMA books that I want to collect, but eventually this will be one shelf of just martial arts books. But we have David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me. I know he's not really a martial artist, but he kind of fits into that theme. Hurricane, which is such a moving book. This boxer that was thrown into jail, and it turns out he wasn't supposed to be there. He was falsely imprisoned, and it's a heart-wrenching story. I highly recommend it. It was made into a movie with Denzel Washington, I believe in 2006, but I'm probably getting the year wrong. Fantastic piece of work. Then we have Iron Ambition by Mike Tyson, a fantastic read. He has another book that I also really like. I've read both, but the Iron Ambition one I like it even more. So that's why I have it collected on my shelves. It's a fantastic book. If you love reading boxing books, that's one of the best ones that I've ever read. And then we have At Home with Muhammad Ali. I love that book too. I'll make plenty of videos on Muhammad Ali in the future because he's also one of my heroes. And next to that, I have another book by Muhammad Ali. That's more of a picture book. I might show you guys that one at the end because some of those picture books are pretty neat to look through and flip through. Then I have a book on Lennox Lewis, the Canadian legend. Fantastic chess player, too. I haven't been able to play him on chess.com yet. I've played Mark Hunt, and I've beaten Mark Hunt quite a bit. He's a fantastic chess player, though. I think he's like a 1400 player. I was able to link up with him on chess.com and play him. So I'm constantly trying to find like boxers or martial artists who play chess and find their usernames on chess.com to play them. I think it's so cool. But next to that, I have Caro Parisian's Mixed Martial Arts. It's kind of just a guidebook to martial arts techniques, everything from striking to ground defense, takedowns, submissions, everything's in there. So it's a nice little guidebook. I used to use it when I was training more often. I was training with friends and stuff. I would use it to kind of show them, this is exactly how we're going to do this move. And I've taught quite a few people martial arts. I would always tell them, like, I'm going to teach you some of the basic stuff, and we'll go to a gym. I knew this place where I could get onto wrestling mats, and nobody was really ever there. I'd go there, show them some techniques, and I would always tell them, like, go to a martial arts gym after this. If this motivates you, please go to a martial arts gym. I know that I'm a decent teacher, and I know quite a bit about martial arts, but I'm not a martial arts gym, and I'm not a professional coach, so please go to a gym. But I would use that book and my own expertise in martial arts to get people motivated and then to get people training. And I've gotten quite a few, like 10 or 20 kids to start training martial arts, and some of them have stuck it through. Some of them have gone on to win competitions and stuff like that. So I love spreading the love for martial arts, and that's why I have so many martial arts books, and that's why I consider myself a martial artist, and that's why I keep it in my life. That's why I also have a MMA YouTube channel, because I will keep watching UFC till the day I die. I don't care how much my philosophical and scientific interests overtake my life. I'll always make room for martial arts because it's taught me so many great lessons, and it's made me into the man that I am today. And I wouldn't be here without martial arts, I think. So next to that, I have Muhammad Ali, another fantastic picture book about the man and his life. And yeah, I have like 3 books on Muhammad Ali. It's not enough. I wish I had like 20. I love that man a lot. So he's a big hero of mine. Next to that, I have a book on the samurai. It's another picture book that's really beautiful. I'll show you guys it at the end of the video as well, because there's a picture on the back that's really scary. And I almost bought this book just to have it so that one day when I have children, I can scare them with the back cover. I know that that's like really mean, but But yeah, I flipped through that book at a thrift store, and I'm like, you know what? This has some pretty useful information about samurai in it, and I'm constantly trying to learn more about those warriors. So I picked that one up, and then I have the UFC encyclopedia. Again, I found it at a thrift store. Perfect shape, and it's a beautiful book. I think it goes for like $100 now if you want to buy it off of Amazon or something like that. So I found it for like $2. Again, so many of the books on my shelves I've picked up for $2, $3, $4, $5, and I found them in perfect shape. So make sure you guys are going to thrift stores and stuff like that. And then at the very end there, kind of crammed in, I have Inside the Lion's Den by Shamrock, and that's another book that just kind of goes over martial arts techniques. It goes over kind of the story of the Lion's Den, one of the most intense mixed martial arts gyms that ever existed. I mean, those guys trained, I think, harder than anybody. It was like them, Shudo Box. There's a couple of gyms where they beat the crap out of each other. And you read some of the stories from that book, the 8-hour training sessions, the way that they would just break each other physically. It's an inspiring book, honestly. Inside the Lion's Den is an underrated book on my shelf. So yeah, that's my martial arts and also some actors and also Freud shelf. I don't know, assorted biographies, I guess. It's kind of a weird shelf, but let's move on. So yeah, on our next shelf here, this will be this shelving unit. So this is the first one that's actually finally in frame. At the very top here, we have our first shelf of Oxford Classics. So I have 2 shelves of Oxford Classics, 1 shelf of Penguin Classics. I eventually will have multiple shelves of both because Penguin and Oxford Classics are 2, collections that I want to keep building out across my whole life, because I have probably 200 or 300 books on my wish list that are Penguin Classics that I still want to get. It's a great way if you want to cheaply, because they're like $10, $20 a book Canadian, if you want to cheaply collect the greatest works of classical literature, philosophy, greatest poetry, the greatest works of history out there. If you want to collect them cheap and you want nice paperbacks where all the spines look the same so they look good on the shelf, you want especially the Oxford Classics, if you want books that have explanatory notes, little biographies on the author, all that kind of extra stuff, Oxford Classics is a great way to go. Penguin also has some extra information in there as well. So yeah, I'm going to keep building those out, and this is one of my shelves of Oxford Classics. So at the very end, we have my continued Russian literature. So we have Dostoevsky's A Gentle Creature and Other Stories. I have a bunch of works by Pushkin here, Eugene Onegin, Boris Godunov, The Queen of Spades and Other Stories, a bunch of works there by Pushkin, almost his complete collected works. I have Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I have The Devil and Other Stories, The Kreutzer Sonata, and Resurrection. So basically the rest of the works of Tolstoy there. I also have Turgenev's First Love and Fathers and Sons. So that kind of completes my Russian literature catalog at the moment. I eventually will get more. I want to get Lermontov and so many others. There's so many great Russian writers out there, but that kind of completes my Russian classics for now. And then I have Alcott's Little Women. I have Middlemarch. I have Madame Bovary. I have Gulliver's Travels, Hobbes' Leviathan. I have a bunch of works by Molière here, The Misanthrope and Don Juan. I have Machiavelli's The Prince. I have Kafka's Metamorphosis and some other stories. I have Wittgenstein, Tactus Logica Philosophicus. I have Myths from Mesopotamia, Beowulf. I have The Song of Roland, and at the very end there, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So yeah, kind of assorted books there, but they're all Oxford Classics, and they look beautiful on the shelf. My favorite books are probably The Death of Ivan Ilyich. What else do I like off that shelf? Molière. Molière's fantastic. I'm French, so I love the works of Molière. Myths from Mesopotamia is very, very interesting, especially with my deep reading of religious studies and theology and the history of religion. I love reading those old stories and trying to dissect them and figure out what they're about. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and The Song of Roland are also fantastic. I love those. Beowulf is great. There's so many great translations of it. I don't have Tolkien's translation at the moment, but I want to pick that up eventually. And yeah, just a fantastic shelf. I could talk about every book on this shelf forever, so I'll move on. On my next shelf, we have one of the most beautiful shelves in my entire collection. This one right here, the Word Cloud Classics. These leather-bound paperbacks are just so beautiful. They're magnificent to flip through. I love the feel of the leather, and I have quite a few here. I don't have all of them in the collection, but I have quite a few. I have The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. I have Washington Irving's stories, collected stories. I have the Brothers Grimm's 2 volumes here, so 100 tales and then 101 more tales or something like that. I have Aesop's Fables. I have Winnie the Pooh, The Wizard of Oz, Hans Christian Andersen's Tales, James Joyce's Dubliners and A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. I have Peter Pan, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, The Romantic Poets, The Three Musketeers by Dumas, and Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So yeah, I absolutely love the way those books look on my shelf. They really pop with the colors there. I sort of have them color coded, so it looks like kind of like a rainbow there. They kind of flow together, which is nice. I tried doing that for this shelf too that's behind me, but you'll see that I'm not perfect at that. I don't have a perfect eye for color. This one was a little bit easier to do, but out of my favorite books on those shelves, obviously I love Dumas. I mentioned him earlier, kind of took a jab at him for having ghostwriters, but it's okay. I can kind of tell in The Count of Monte Cristo like where his I forget what his assistant was, but I can kind of tell where they were writing a little bit and where Dumas was kind of taking over. But he had an extraordinary output throughout his life. I mean, I think he wrote over 600 works or something like that. He was one of the most prolific writers of all time, and just a French giant. I absolutely love The Count of Monte Cristo. It's one of my favorite adventure novels of all time. The escape from the prison is just so thrilling to read about. The Three Musketeers is also fantastic. Obviously, Hugo. I like Hugo even more. I'll talk about Les Mis in a second when I get to that book, but The Hunchback of Notre Dame is also obviously fantastic. The Romantic Poets book there is terrific. It has like the collected works of Byron and Blake and all of the great romantic poets that you would expect to have in a book like that. It has kind of all of them collected in one spot. So that's where most of my poetry is on my shelves, is in that book right there. I love Peter Pan. I love James Joyce, as I said earlier. The Dubliners and A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man are a lot easier to read than Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses, so I would start there if you're getting into James Joyce. And yeah, The Brothers Grimm to me is one of my most read books of all time. It's in the top 2. There's one book that I've read more than The Brothers Grimm, which I'll mention when I get to it. But The Brothers Grimm, I've fallen asleep to the audiobooks of those tales so many times. It's one of my go-tos. I love listening to those old tales. And yeah, that's my my beautifully colored classics shelf. The Word Cloud Classics Flexi Bound is, I believe, what they're called. You can find them on Amazon. They're about $22 a pop Canadian, so they're actually fairly cheap to collect. And on my next shelf right here, we have basically my entire childhood. Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, along with Star Wars, are my 3 most watched sagas or trilogies ever. I would rewatch Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars every single year, all throughout the year, all the time. And my parents are like, don't you get sick of those movies? Never. I never have. I never will. I still to this day could throw any of those films on and just fall away into those worlds. And then reading of those worlds has just given me a much deeper appreciation for them. I was very, very young when I started watching Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and Star Wars, so I unfortunately didn't read the novels first. I can't say that I was one of those kids that read the Harry Potter books first, and then I saw the movies. I was a 2000s baby, so I was young enough that I saw the films first. But going back and rereading the Harry Potter books, man, I have such a deep love and appreciation for J.K. Rowling and the world that she crafted. It is something. It's beautiful. It's magnificent. It's so deep. It's psychologically and religiously profound, and I can't wait to unpack both of these series. I probably won't do book analysis at first, but I will do film analysis videos for every single Harry Potter film and every single Lord of the Rings film, and in those we will take apart the psychological depth of both of these series because they're just so fantastic. I mean, Tolkien, he's the greatest fantasy writer of all time, one, and he's probably, I don't know, top 3, top 5 greatest writers of all time. I think what he crafted with Middle-earth is one of the greatest feats of fiction ever achieved. creating languages on his own. I mean, to have the knowledge of linguistics to create your own languages to be a part of your story, the maps that he created, just there's so much in the world of Tolkien, so much effort that he put in. And these books, the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books, which originally I believe came out in 6 volumes, and then they were shortened into 3, but it's one story. He wanted to put it out as 1 volume, but these are just a fraction of the works that he created. Like, he created so many other works. I don't even have them all collected at this point, but the world of Tolkien is so deep and has whisked me away on so many adventures. I mean, I've spent so much time in my head, just in my imagination, playing around in the worlds that Tolkien and Rowling have created for me. And, you know, it's not an exaggeration to say that this shelf is my entire childhood, because I've spent so much time here with these characters. And I'm so grateful to both of these authors for creating such amazing landscapes for me to play around in. And yeah, I could talk about these books forever, and I will. Like I said, I'm going to do film analysis videos for The Lord of the Rings, for Harry Potter. I'll eventually do book analysis for both. I'll probably do adjacent videos as well, just talking about the deeper psychology of both series. And yeah, I mean, the Tolkien box set here is beautiful because it has all the work of Alan Lee in it, all colored and just beautifully done. There's bookmarks for each of the books too. These aren't as nice. They don't have bookmarks or anything like that, but still a fantastic, the art on each book is just beautiful. I might take some of these out at the end of the video and show you guys, but this did come in a big red box, but it was crushed by my Amazon driver, so I had to throw it out, and I just have the hardcover books. Luckily, none of the books were damaged, but I have these beautiful books here, and yeah, I really love this shelf. I can't wait to talk more about these books on my channel, and yeah, I think everybody should read them. If you love the Harry Potter films, if you love the Lord of the Rings book or films, definitely read the books, because there's so much more lore, there's so much more depth in the books. Like the whole character of Tom Bombadil is just completely cut out of the films, and he's one of the most interesting characters Tolkien has ever come up with. And if you have only watched the Lord of the Rings films, you don't even know that character's name. You're like, who's Tom Bombadil? Did you just make that up? No. No, it's a real character in Lord of the Rings, and he's one of the most interesting characters in the whole Tolkien universe. So yeah, I'm going to stop there, because I could literally ramble on for the next 2 hours about just these 2 series of books. So yeah, I got so much love for them. That's why I have beautiful hardcover copies of them. So let's move on. Next up, we have the bulk of my comic book collection. So I showed you guys before that I do collect manga. I also collect comic books. I'm not somebody who's like, I only collect manga and American comic books suck. And I'm not somebody who's like, I only collect American comic books, manga sucks. I think both perspectives are completely stupid. I think you should collect both. And here I have basically just Batman. There's a couple other stories mixed in there, just a couple, but it's mostly Batman. Batman's the character that I kind of grew up on. When I was very young, I liked Spider-Man because I saw the Tobey Maguire films, and when you're very, very young, you don't really have that dark place in your mind built out yet. But as I got older, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I shifted over to Batman, and Batman became my favorite superhero, and he has been ever since. I think his story is so interesting. The psychological depth to it is just so grabbing to me. And I keep coming back to it to engage with this caped crusader that lives in the darkness and is his shadow, and he confronts his shadow and almost becomes it in a way. And I can't wait to break down the psychology of Batman on this channel. I'll have many, many videos talking about Batman in the future, like for so many other things on my shelves that I've already promised. But yeah, I have a deep love for Batman. I've read even more comics than just this. Like, I've read Batman to the nth degree. I think if there's one superhero that I've read just about everything there is to read about on, it's Batman. I'm not like the most educated when it comes to Marvel comics. I haven't read every single event. I don't read everything that comes out on Spider-Man or whatnot. But when it comes to Batman, that is one character that I consume basically everything there is out there on him. So here are some of the books that I have. I have Batman, The World of the Dark Knight, which is kind of just it's a companion book that goes over, the golden ages of the comics and the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, and it kind of shows you what are the key issues, kind of shows you the Batcave, his gadgets. It's just a companion book to reading Batman and Batman comics, so it's a useful tool, I guess. And then I have V for Vendetta. I do want to get that in hardcover eventually because I have 3 out of 4 of Alan Moore's comic books, graphic novels on hardcover. I just don't have V for Vendetta in hardcover yet. But I have a paperback version, and I absolutely love that story. I think the comic book is slightly better than the film, but the film is also a beautiful film. It's an awesome piece of work, and I just think that the graphic novel is a masterpiece. I wouldn't so much call the film a masterpiece, but it's close. It's definitely a fantastic film. I also have Kingdom Come there, which is a fantastic Justice League story. I have Superman Red Sun, one of my favorite Superman stories of all time. I have the Justice League International. That one's a weak book. I might throw that out eventually. I think it was a gift one year, and it doesn't really connect to anything else that I have, and it's kind of just a throwaway comic book that I have mixed in there. So that's probably the weakest book on my shelf there. And then I have Nightfall volumes 1, 2, and 3, one of my favorite Batman arcs of all time. Obviously, it was turned into The Dark Knight Rises, that famous Chris Nolan film. And reading the books, I think that the books are so much deeper. They truly are a masterpiece. I think the Nightfall books are a masterpiece. The Dark Knight Rises, you could consider it a masterpiece. It is still a Chris Nolan film, and it's got amazing acting, fantastic action sequences. I think Tom Hardy is amazing in that film, but I don't know. So I have a couple issues with it here or there. I think there's a couple flaws with The Dark Knight Rises. I don't know if I would consider it a masterpiece quite like The Dark Knight is, but we could debate that in the comments. Then we have Batman Year One, The Dark Knight Returns, A Death in the Family, Haunted Night, The Long Halloween, Dark Victory, Gotham by Gaslight, The Cult, Batman and Son, Batman the Black Mirror, Dark Knight's Metal, The Batman Who Laughed, Batman 3 Jokers, Joker, Arkham Asylum, Batman the Man Who Laughs, The Court of Owls, The City of Owls, Death of the Family. I have Faces of Fear and Scare Tactics, Batman Hush, the 20th Anniversary Edition, Batman the Killing Joke, there's my other hardcover Alan Moore comic, and at the very end I have the deluxe version of Under the Red Hood, which is a beautiful book. One of my nicest comic books for sure. So basically all of the most essential Batman comics are there. There are a couple that I'm missing. I still want to get, Batman Gothic, and there's a couple other ones that I still want to get and add to my shelf and make it a completely just Batman shelf. Eventually getting rid of the Justice League and V for Vendetta comics and putting those somewhere else. But yeah, I absolutely love this shelf. Some of my favorite stories that I ever grew up on. I used to go to my local library and take out stacks of comic books at a time, and most of the comic books in my library were Batman comic books, so that's probably also why I engaged with him so deeply. And I would reread these stories over and over and over again, and I was constantly checking them out. I probably upset a lot of other kids in my town who wanted to take these books out because I was constantly taking them out and I was constantly reading them. I've submersed myself in these stories, and I will for the rest of my life, and I can't wait to pass them down to my children. Growing up, I never had comic books in the household. My dad never collected them growing up, so I finally built a comic book collection, and I can't wait to give it to my son one day and let him read all these Batman comics that made me into the person that I am today. Batman has played a huge role in transforming me, and I've learned a lot of life lessons through reading Batman comics and watching the Batman films and the TV show and all of that. I love the world of the Dark Knight, and yeah, holds a deep place in my heart. So let's move on to the next shelf. Oh, actually, I will just say, before we move on to the next shelf, what my favorite comic books from that line was. I said Nightfall is one of my favorite there. I also really like The Long Halloween. Pretty generic pick, most people do. Batman Hush was a story that really moved me the first time that I read it. I believe I first read it while I was playing Arkham City, and Arkham City is in my top 3, top 5 games of all time. I love that game to death. I've replayed it so many times. Takes about 8 to 10 hours to play through all the way through, so it's not too long of a game, so I constantly come back to it and replay it. And when I was playing it for the first time, I was also reading Batman Hush, so that one holds a special place in my heart as well. Arkham Asylum has some of the most beautiful art I've ever seen in comic book history, and yeah, really every single book on that shelf is one of my favorites, but those are the ones that stand out the most to me, are the Nightfall trilogy, obviously The Long Halloween, and Batman Hush. So So let's move on to the next shelf now. So on my last shelf on this shelving unit here down at the end, I know you guys can't see it because it's cut off from the camera, but this is my hockey shelf. So I grew up in Canada, Edmonton, Canada. So the Edmonton Oilers are my local hockey team, which is one of the greatest hockey teams of all time. The greatest hockey player of all time played in Edmonton and had the most success in his career while he was in Edmonton, multiple 200-point seasons, which nobody besides, I think, like Lemieux has done. I think Lemieux was either close or just hit 200. But yeah, Wayne Gretzky is like by far the greatest hockey player of all time. It's not like LeBron and Michael Jordan where there's a debate. The next closest person to Gretzky in points, I think, is still like 1,000 points away. So you could take away all of Gretzky's goals, which is like 900 goals, and he would still be the points leader of all time just with his assists. So Gretzky he's hockey royalty. I know he's getting a little bit hate right now in the news because of his support for Trump and stuff like that, but I still love Wayne. I've met him a couple times now, and yeah, he's like, it's like Jesus and Gretzky, like in Canada. Like those are the people we look up to. Like he's huge in Canada, and he played in my hometown, and both my parents, my mom and dad both grew up going to the Edmonton Oilers games as a kid and watching his greatness. And then I grew up watching the Oilers. Well, I grew up during the decade of darkness, so I watched that, us going through like multiple coaches every single year and failure after failure after failure. Finally, in 2015, we landed Connor McDavid, the next Wayne Gretzky, the next greatest player of all time, and currently the best hockey player on the planet. And we also have arguably the second best hockey player on the planet in Leon Draisaitl. So there's always been the greatest of the great hockey players playing here in Edmonton, and I've had a special privilege of having my dad having had season tickets growing up, so I got to see basically every single home game. I've been to hundreds of Oilers games. That's a privilege that not everybody around me has. You know, most kids that I knew growing up only got to see a couple Oilers games if they were lucky in a year. Most kids didn't see any, so I was very lucky in that sense, and I got to play hockey. It's a very expensive sport. It costs like $1,000 for equipment now. You know, even skates can get up to $1,000 just for skates now, and sticks are like $500. It's ridiculous. Hockey is a very expensive sport, but I had parents that did fairly well in life, and I got to play that sport, and I played it, like I said, my entire life. I'd play it basically every day of the week, multiple times. Played it for about 15 years, played it to a decently high level. And yeah, it's in my veins. It's in my blood. Like it'll forever be a part of me. The fact that I grew up playing hockey, I've made so many friends, you know, on those hockey teams, on those tournaments, you know, driving up to the mountains, playing in the mountains, going on hikes with the boys and stuff like that. It's holds a special place in my heart. So I'll always have a bookshelf that kind of reflects that love for hockey. I don't watch it as much anymore now. I used to watch every single season game of the Oilers. You know, that's my team. I also love the Chicago Blackhawks. I love the Colorado Avalanche. Those are like my top three teams. I was a big fan of Chicago when they were on their run, when they won with Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. They won those 3 cups. That was so special. I wish that was my hometown team, but at least I had a team that I was cheering for growing up, and I got to see win championships. But yeah, I'll always have a shelf that kind of reflects that. So here's the books that I have on this shelf. I have Wayne Gretzky, 99, My Life in Pictures, Hockey's Greatest Stars, Retired Numbers, 20th Century Hockey Chronicle, Greatest Moments in Canada Hockey History, 99 Stories of the Game with Wayne Gretzky, Mr. Hockey by Gordie Howe. We have Gordie, which is another Gordie Howe biography, Jean Beliveau, Bobby Orr, another book on Bobby Orr. That's more of a picture book. Mark Messier. I have Phil Esposito's book. I have Bob Probert's book. I have Cujo's book. I have Theo Fleury's book there behind the Colorado Avalanche puck. I have another book on Howe, and then at the very end there I have On the Ice with Wayne Gretzky. So a full shelf of hockey books, like I said, just kind of expressing my love for the game, and I love reading stories from the greatest players of all time. These are the people that I grew up watching on TV every single night. Like, I've spent a lot of time in hockey dressing rooms, watching hockey games, being in the stands. Like, basically the first 20 years of my life has been spent kind of hovering around hockey. So I think my shelves kind of reflect that, or at least this shelf reflects that. And yeah, some of these books I might not ever reread again in my life. Some of them I definitely want to pass down to my children, but I just want a shelf that kind of reflects that passion that I had for that game, because like I said, I don't really watch it that much anymore. I watch the playoffs. I used to watch every single regular season game, but now I only really watch the playoffs and when the teams are in that final stage, because I just don't have as much time anymore. And I don't really play it that much. I can go out on the outdoor rink at any time and have fun, but I'm consumed by this channel and by philosophical ideas and so many other things now in my life. My life's kind of taken a different turn, but that's always going to be my roots is my love for hockey. So that concludes that shelf. Let's move on to the big shelf behind me now. This is the big boy. So at the very top here, I know it's kind of cut off, which sucks. I couldn't really get it all in frame here, but at the very top, I have my other shelf of Oxford Classics, which does have a bit of a theme going to it. There's a couple works of fiction thrown in here, but it is mostly a history shelf. So it's mostly primary sources for Greek and Roman history, which are subjects that I am hugely passionate about, and here are the books that are on that shelf. We have Hesiod, Herodotus, Thucydides. I have a bunch of plays here by Euripides. I have Xenophon, Polybius. I have Diodorus of Sicily, Sallust. I have a bunch of works by Cicero here. This is not all of the works by Cicero, but this is a large portion of his works. So I've selected letters, the Republic, on life and death, defense speeches, political speeches, and on obligations. I have Caesar's, Julius Caesar's, the Civil War and the Gallic War. I have Levy's, the history of Rome. I have books obviously 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, and 41 to 45. I believe that's all of the surviving works of Levy. I believe that's all of what we have that survived. I think 80% of Levy's works have been lost to time, unfortunately. I wish we had the entire history of Rome, but we have a fraction of it, and that's enough for me. I love reading Levy. Then we have Virgil's Aeneid. We have Horace, Ovid's Metamorphosis, Josephus's The Jewish War. We have Pliny the Younger's Complete Letters. I have Epictetus, I have Tacitus's Annals, the Histories, and Agricola in Germany. I have Plutarch's Lives, obviously Greek lives, Roman lives, and Hellenistic lives there. I have the Lives of the Caesars by Suetonius. I have Arrian's Alexander the Great, and Cassius Dio's The Fall of the Roman Republic. So yeah, that's not all of the primary sources when it comes to Greek and Roman history, obviously, but that is the main bulk of it. That's kind of what you're probably going to find if you're looking for it on Amazon or whatever. There's more out there, obviously, but I'm not a historian. I don't have access to absolutely everything, and I don't have access to what's coming out daily. There's constantly things that are being uncovered. I think we just got another primary source from about 2,000 years ago. We found some other manuscript that gives us more insights to Greek history. So there's constantly stuff coming out, and it's hard to keep up with it unless you're an actual historian. I'm not. I just have a very deep love for history, so I'm constantly reading it. And yeah, these primary sources have been a huge help to me. And I love that there's explanatory notes that are spliced in throughout each one of these Oxford Classics. My favorites are obviously Tacitus. Everybody loves Tacitus. He just has a beautiful way of writing. Levy's obviously fantastic just for the comprehensiveness and just how detailed his work is. I love reading the works of Julius Caesar. Obviously, you have Ovid in there, and Virgil. The Aeneid is a must-read as well. I don't have Homer's works in there because I have them on another shelf, which we'll get to in a second here. But yeah, everything on that shelf is useful to me, and I'll keep coming back to them, keep reading them. I'll eventually make videos on every single book you see on that shelf. I'll eventually make a complete reading guide to Roman history, a complete reading guide to Greek history. I'll give you guys which primary sources I would read, what modern books I would read, and if I could find any archives for you guys, find any copies of manuscripts that you can see online. I'll list those links for you guys as well, and just kind of give you guys the best guide to exploring this history without actually becoming a historian, if that makes any sense. So yeah, that's a shelf that I really love, and we'll move on to this one here, which is my Penguin Classics shelf. So on this Penguin Classics shelf, it's again, it's kind of weirdly organized because I have authors that are split up because some of the spines have white titles and some of them have orange titles, and I just kept all the white titles together. It just made sense to me aesthetically, but then I have Nietzsche over here and then Nietzsche over there, and it's weird, but it makes sense to me. So I'll list off all the titles and then we'll talk about my favorites. So So in the very end there, I have the collected works of Confucius. I have a bunch of works from Plato. I think I have all, no, I don't have all of the works from Plato. I'm close to it. I think I can complete them all with the Penguin Classics, but I'm not too sure. There might be a couple pieces that aren't collected in the Penguin Classics, but I have everything that I can find from Penguin on Plato, and then I have the works of Aristotle there as well. I'm missing one key work from Aristotle, and I can't remember what it is, but it's on my wish list, and I'll get it eventually. But I have, again, the bulk of Plato and Aristotle's work. I have letters from a Stoic there by Seneca. I have St. Augustine's or Augustine's City of God. I have Thomas Aquinas' selected writings. I don't have Summa Theologica yet. I'm currently working through it, so when I finish Summa Theologica, I will get all 5 volumes of that, hopefully in hardcover, if not paperback, but I want to collect Summa Theologica. I want the whole thing eventually. I'm slowly working through it. It's a massive piece of work. It's a beautiful masterpiece, though. It's really not too hard for me to read. I find it so engaging, but yeah, I just have his selected writings at the moment. Then I have, of course, Don Quixote, my favorite comedy book of all time. I don't think that there's ever been a book ever in my life that I've consistently laughed more throughout than Don Quixote. It holds a special place in my heart. I'll make many videos on it in the future, and it's I recommend it to everybody. It's such an amazing journey. I love Don Quixote. And we have Marco Polo's Travels. I have Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. I believe that's actually in the old, or is it Old or Middle English? I can't remember. I think it's Old English, but it's in the original English, so that's why it's a little bit thicker than the other version. And I have trouble working through it. It's actually my only Penguin Classics. You can kind of tell there by the condition that it's in. It's my only Penguin Classics that actually was used. It's because it's normally a $30 Penguin Classics book. I found it secondhand at a thrift store, and it has actually annotated notes throughout it, which might be useful for me because I obviously don't speak Old English. So yeah, I've been working through that slowly. I haven't finished Chaucer. It's a large work, but I absolutely love reading through it. And then we have Kierkegaard's Either Or and Sickness Unto Death. We have Nietzsche's The Will to Power, The Joyous Science, Human All Too Human, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Ecce Homo, The Birth of Tragedy, On the Genealogy of Morals. And I do have a couple works of Nietzsche that I'll mention in a second here, but like I said, I have them sorted by the color of the titles. But another thing that you see there, some of them say Friedrich Nietzsche, and then some of them say Nietzsche. I just wish Penguin Classics was consistent, and then also like some of the spines have the white lettering, and I just wish there was like a borderline consistency and nothing changed, but it is what it is. That's why my shelves here look a little bit messy. But after that, I have Albert Einstein's Reality, Thomas More's Utopia, Virginia Woolf's Miss Dalloway. I have Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Then I have more Nietzsche here, Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. I have The Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist, and then I have more Kierkegaard here as well, Fear and Trembling. I also have Spinoza's Ethics, St. Augustine's Confessions, Sophocles' 3 Theban plays. I believe that's Oedipus at Colonus, Oedipus the King, and Antigone. I believe those are the 3 that are collected in that. I have Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. I have Aristotle's The Politics, Poetics. So yeah, obviously I have some works of Plato and Aristotle at the end there, and then also some works of Plato and Aristotle at this end. Really, they should all be together, but then the white titles with the orange titles messes me up, and it doesn't look good aesthetically. So as long as the shelves look good to me, I think that's all that matters. If it annoys you, I apologize, but these aren't your shelves, so I don't really care. Out of my favorite books on this shelf, Immanuel Kant's up there for me. He's one of those thinkers that's incredibly difficult and challenging for me, so I enjoy that. It's like doing a really hard workout or lifting more weight than what you're used to. It's like, damn, this is a struggle, but you feel alive while you're working through it. I feel similar when I'm reading Kant. I'm like, man, this is hard, and this is taking a lot of brain power for me to like process everything that he's saying and connect it together with my worldview and how does it alter my worldview. And I don't know. Kant is brilliant. He brings me back to sanity sometimes. Sometimes he makes me lose my sanity. But I love reading Kant, and he's definitely up there for me. Obviously, Nietzsche, probably my favorite philosopher of all time, if not in my top 3 or 4. I love his works. Thus Spoke Zarathustra is by far my favorite work by him. I think it's his magnum opus, his masterpiece, and it's one of my favorite books of all time, just point blank and period. Just one of my favorite books ever written. I also love Kierkegaard. I kind of see him as somewhat of an opposite to Nietzsche, and I really relate to him. Whenever I read Kierkegaard, I feel like my soul and his soul are very similar. I feel like I connect to that guy. I would have loved to have a coffee with him. He's one of those guys I would have loved to talk to. Obviously, I love both of the saints, Augustine and Aquinas. They're both fantastic. I love Plato, Aristotle. Every single name on this shelf to me is very, very important. There's not really anything that's weak on this shelf, maybe besides the Stoic philosophy to some people, but Stoicism still has its place as well. So I absolutely love this shelf. It's kind of my bulk philosophy shelf, is this Penguin Classic shelf. So let's move on to this one, which is my Arcturus. I believe that's the company that produces this book. These books, the Arcturus Classic Shelf, that's kind of in the shape of a rainbow, but or in the shape, it's kind of organized as a rainbow, but I don't have the best sense of color, so some blues might be in the wrong spot, if you know what I mean. But let's take a look at this shelf next. So on this shelf at the very end, we have War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. We have a Sherlock Holmes book there by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I have kind of spread out throughout this shelf a bunch of different works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, his Sherlock Holmes works. So they're not all together like they should be but again, I wanted to color code them, so I'm sorry if they're spread out. Eventually I might get like a hardcover collected volume of all of Sherlock Holmes, so it's all in one spot, and maybe I'll give some of these away. We'll see, because I'm constantly getting new Arcturus books, and then ones that I have copies of I'll give to other people. So they're constantly in and out of my shelves, largely because these books that you see here, these Arcturus books, they go for 3 for $10 in Canada at Indigo. So I've been able to collect these fairly quickly. There's about 50 here, and I don't know what the math is on that. I'll put the numbers up on screen because I'm not a math whiz, but I was able to actually collect these rather quickly because they were so cheap. So I constantly have new ones coming in, and ones, like I said, that I have copies of, I'll give away. But continuing on this shelf, we also have Oscar Wilde's De Profundis. We have Casino Royale by Ian Fleming. We have The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. The Bell Jar. We have Candide by Voltaire. The Origin of Species. Moby Dick. Ernest Shackleton's South. We have The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, The Old Man and the Sea, Orlando by Virginia Woolf, The Dialogues of Socrates. There's a book of Plato that should be up here with the rest of the Plato, but I don't know, I have it in the Arcturus form. It is what it is. And then I have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, The Scarlet Letter, The Art of Rhetoric by Aristotle. Again, Aristotle should be up here, but I have one copy in the Arcturus. It is what it is. I have Down and Out in Paris and London, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, The Federalist Papers, Meditations by René Descartes, Animal Farm by George Orwell, The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, A Room of One's Own, again by Virginia Woolf, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, Pensées by Blaise Pascal. I have some works by Frederick Douglass, My Inventions by Tesla, The Turn of the Screw, To Have and to Have Not, The Man Who Would Be King, Dream Psychology by Freud, Chekhov's Selected Stories, 1984, The Beautiful and the Damned, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, On Liberty by John Stuart Mill, The Great Gatsby, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, The Upanishads, The Social Contract, This Side of Paradise, The Rights of Man, Tender as the Night, Shirley, The Sun Also Rises, The Innocents Abroad, Sherlock Holmes and the Return of Sherlock Holmes, Heart of Darkness, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and at the very end there I have John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. So I know those last two books at the end there of Mice and Men and Frankenstein don't really fit in the Arcturus line there, so I need to get a couple more Arcturus books to fill it out. But yeah, basically a complete shelf there of Arcturus books. Like I said, the reason why I'm collecting them is because I think that they're really nice paperbacks. They don't have a ton of extra information like the Penguin Classics and the Oxford Classics do. but they have really nice covers. I'm not going to show you all of them today, but they do a really nice job at presenting really beautiful, really colorful colors. Obviously, all the spines are very colorful as well, so they look really good on a shelf. And yeah, at 3 for $10, you really can't go wrong collecting classics that way. So yeah, I love this shelf. Out of my favorite books on the shelf, oh boy, is that tough. I love Heart of Darkness. I love Joseph Conrad. I actually have his collected works somewhere. I think it's underneath my TV, so I'll show you guys that one in a bit. I love Blaise Pascal. He's one of my favorite philosophers of all time. I think he's absolutely brilliant. I love the works of George Orwell. I have some Freud in there, obviously. Huxley's amazing too. You should read Orwell and Huxley at the same time. 1984 and Brave New World are a great double feature. You know, you watch 2 films at the same time. I'd read both of those books at the same time as well. Moby Dick is one of my favorite books of all time. I highly recommend everybody reads Moby Dick. I know it can be tough at times when there's full chapters about like the dictionary definitions of whales and stuff like that, but it really submerses you in the story, and when you get to the end of it, those last couple chapters are exhilarating. And Moby Dick is a fantastic novel. I love South by Ernest Shackleton. I made a Why You Should Read video on it already. It's one of the most inspiring, in fact, I think it's the most inspiring book I've ever read in my life. So I highly recommend you read South. It'll keep you going. Whatever you're going through in life, you're not going through what Shackleton and his crew went through down south. So harrowing book, highly recommend it. There's so many fantastic books on this shelf. I could talk about them all day long. So I'm going to move on because this shelf is an absolute trap. There's just so many books that are calling out to me that I want to talk about. But like I said, I'll have a Why You Should Read video on every single one of these books at some point in the future. Let's move on to the next shelf. So it's really a shame that you guys can't see this shelf that's behind my back here, because this is one of the nicest shelves that I have. Usually this chair isn't always sitting here. I have it a little bit more to the side because when I come into my apartment, I usually come home and like spend 5 minutes just staring at my shelves, staring at the beauty of them. And this is one of my most beautiful shelves. So I've collected the Canterbury Classic hardcovers or leather-bound editions. They're only about $30 to $35 Canadian, so they've been pretty cheap to collect, and they look stunning on shelves. They have gilded edges, bookmarks, a lot of them have illustrations, and here are the ones that I've collected. I don't have all of them. Eventually I might collect all of them because they're so beautiful, and for the price you can't go wrong, but I have the bulk of them, and I have, at the very end here, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I have The Art of War and some other works of Eastern philosophy. I have Edgar Allan Poe's collected works. It's not every single work by Poe, but it's the essentials. I have the Brothers Grimm, so obviously I have 2 copies of that. I have the these ones, the flexi-bound covers, right over here, the red and black one, and then I have a hardcover copy. Now you might be asking, well, doesn't seem like you have a lot of copies of books on your shelves, and there's a reason for that. I don't like having copies of books. To me, that's wasted space. That's space that I could have for another unique book that I don't have. So I don't like having copies of books, but there are a few books that I do have copies of, and they're on purpose, and it's because I buy these books, like I said at the start of the video, for myself primarily, but when I'm buying books, I'm also thinking about my children. I don't have children. I don't even have a girlfriend, but I'm thinking about my future children one day and what would they maybe want to read. And I'm thinking, you know, the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales and Aesop's fables or Aesop's fables and Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales. I think these fairy tale books are going to be ones that I'm going to read constantly to my children, especially when they're very young. So I want to have multiple copies of them that I can keep kind of by their bedside, also on my bookshelves, or if we're going on a camping trip, I might want to bring the flexi bounds and not ruin one of my hardcovers. Like, I'm just thinking about stuff like that. So that's why I have multiple copies of the fairy tales, especially Brothers Grimm, Aesop's fables, and Hans Christian Andersen's tales. So that's why you see those ones pop up multiple times, if you're wondering. I don't usually like to copy or collect copies of books. If ever I do have a copy of a book, I always give it to a friend or a cousin or a family member, somebody who I think's going to read it. After that, I have The Death of King Arthur, fantastic read. I have Robert Louis Stevenson's collected tales. I have Dante's The Divine Comedy, Jules Verne's collected tales, Charles Dickens' collected tales. I have Homer's Iliad and Odyssey in one volume, Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I have the Bronte sisters' collected works, Jack London's collected works, Walt Whitman's House of Leaves. I have Aesop's Fables, like I just said there. The Arabian Nights, Robert Frost's collected poems, Hans Christian Andersen's collected fairy tales, and at the very end, I have Jane Austen's The Complete Novels. So yeah, these books are absolutely beautiful, and a lot of them, well, not a lot of them, maybe 3 or 4 of them, I'll pull out at the end of the video and I'll show you guys, especially Dante, Alice in Wonderland, I think Aesop's Fables I'll take out for you guys. I'll take out a couple of them that are illustrated, and I'll show you guys some of the illustrations and just how beautiful they are. I really highly recommend collecting books from Canterbury Classics if you can, because like I said, the gilded edges, the bookmarks, the color of the pages too, it's like more of like a yellowy kind of color. It's not like that harsh white that kind of contrasts a little bit too much sometimes, so it's a little bit softer on the eyes. The font's beautiful. Some people say that the font's a little bit too small, but I mean, I have good vision, so it doesn't bother me, but that might bother some people. But I'll show you guys in a second here what they kind of look like, because I highly recommend people collecting them, especially when they're like $33 Canadian. I want to buy more of them because they look so beautiful on my shelf. Really, when people come over and they see my bookshelves, that's one of the shelves in the shelving unit that they point to and say that that's one of your most beautiful shelves. So yeah, let's move on to the final shelf on this big bookshelf here at the very bottom. And on this bottom shelf, I have more manga and comic books, and these Berserk novels are so beautiful. I love the way they look on my shelves, and Berserk is my favorite manga of all time. It's tied with Vagabond. I can't put anything above Berserk, so I love Vagabond. It's got to be tied, or at least it might be second, because Berserk, man, the artwork in Berserk is phenomenal. I can't show a lot of it to you guys today. I might show you guys a couple little bits of it, but a lot of it's pretty graphic. It is one work of fiction that I would say kind of deserves the 18A tag. I think most things that are rated R or 18A, you could probably show it to a 15, 16-year-old and they'll be totally fine. Most R-rated, 18A rated content I engaged with when I was 14, 15, 16. So most stuff I would say doesn't actually deserve that rating. I think you can show kids a little bit younger than that. But Berserk, on the other hand, I think you should almost have to be 25 to read it, because you need the emotional maturity to deal with the trauma that comes with reading Berserk. When you get to that 4th volume, your life changes forever. You get hit with a cut right down the heart with a huge sword with the Dragon Slayer, and it opens up a wound that just never will heal. I will always think about the eclipse and what happened, and yeah, just such a powerful story. I'm going to have so many videos on Berserk in the future on the channel. I'm currently working on a psychology of Berserk video, and that should be out relatively soon, maybe within a month, and I'll have many, many more videos on this beautiful work of fiction in the future, talking about the 1997 anime. I'll talk about the soundtrack and just how gorgeous that is for that. I'll talk about, obviously, the manga itself. Maybe I'll do some reviews of these deluxe editions. I know there's already reviews of these online that you guys can go check out. Other creators have done a much better job than I can do, but maybe I'll take these books off the shelf and show you guys to them in more detail, because they are gorgeous. Each one of them has a bookmark. Each one of them, I believe, collects 3 volumes, except for number 14 there. I think that just has 2 or maybe 1 volume in it. I can't remember, but it's got some extra stuff at the end, some interviews from Miura, some character sheets, and some sheets of how to draw some of the characters and stuff like that. And yeah, Berserk to me is it's a piece of fiction that will forever live in my heart. It's one of my, like I said, one of my favorite works of fiction of all time, regardless of medium. I put it up there with Lord of the Rings, the films and the books. I put it up there with the greatest pieces of music that I've ever listened to. I put it up there with the top tier, the S tier plus. That's where I put Berserk. It's very, very special to me. And then at the end there, I do have some Marvel comics. I don't have as many Marvel comics as I do DC comics, because I love Batman the most, and he's the character who I connect to the most, so I have a little bit more DC comics at the moment, but I will collect more Marvel in the future, because I do also read a lot of Marvel comics. I'm pretty well read in X-Men, and I do read a lot of the crossover events. So as you can see there, I have Civil War, House of M, Days of Future Past, Dark Phoenix Saga. I have Secret Wars, Infinity Gauntlet, and Infinity War. That's just what I have currently. I do want to get Secret Wars from 2015. I want to get Secret Invasion. I want to get House of M, or not House of M. I have House of M. I want to get Powers of X and what's the other one? It's Powers of X and House of X, I believe, is the two, and they're kind of combined into one novel there. There's a bunch. I got a whole wish list. Kraven's Last Hunt, Daredevil Born Again, Hulk, Planet Hulk. There's just so many. I got a huge wish list of Marvel comics that I want to collect eventually, but collecting comics does get very expensive, and I haven't even cracked into the omnibus scene yet. If I were collecting omnibuses, I would have no money for food. I would start starving because those omnibuses are very tempting, but they're very, very expensive. So eventually I might get into that. And I also want to collect The Walking Dead eventually because that's a comic book series that I grew up on. I started reading it just before the series came out. And then from season 1 to about season 7 or 8, I watched every single season with my dad, and it was kind of like our show. And I'd get lost in the Robert Kirkman comics, and I really like those comics. I think they're fantastic. I've also read Crossed. Don't really like that one. It's a little bit too graphic for me. I've read a bunch of other comics, but there's only a few that I really want to collect. So a few more Marvel comics. Like I said, The Walking Dead. I really want to collect Vinland Saga because out of the big 3 sign-in mangas, I love all 3 of them. I love Vinland Saga. I love Vagabond. I love Berserk. I want to collect all 3. So I will get the Vinland Saga deluxe volume soon. I think I'm going to buy those for myself for my birthday. Maybe I'll get Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire because I don't own that yet either. One of those 2 things I'm going to be buying myself for my birthday. Maybe both if I'm lucky. But I want to get Vinland Saga. I also want to get Monster because I really love Monster. I love the anime. I love reading the manga. Past that, I don't know if I'll collect too far outside of that because as you guys can see, I also collect history books. I collect philosophy works, sci-fi books. I collect a lot of stuff. So I got to kind of limit myself a little bit on what I collect. I can't have everything. You know, I had every single Stephen King book at one point, and I had to kind of cut down because you got to keep the quality up, and you got to match the quality and quantity. You know, you got to keep that balance. But at the very end there, I have Mouse, which is a fantastic comic book. I think if you're into history and that's kind of like what you like to read nonfiction, but you're a little bit interested in comic books, maybe even if you're not interested, I think you should read Mouse because it's a powerful work of fiction and it does connect to the history of the concentration camps and it tells that story pretty well. I think it's an essential read if you're going to read about World War II history. It's kind of weird for me to say that there's a comic book that I think is essential reading for World War II history, but I do think Mouse is essential. And then you have Persepolis there at the end, which is a similar story to Mouse, but more about the Iranian Revolution. Also a fantastic read, one of the greatest comic books of all time. I highly recommend it. But this shelf is primarily dominated by the Berserk deluxe novels, and each of these were $65 Canadian. I bought them all in 1 month, so I spent almost $1,000 in 1 month just buying Berserk novels because I just wanted to collect them all. I've seen the 97 Berserk series now, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. I have it collected on my laptop. I took the 97 Berserk series, I put it in DaVinci Resolve, I cut out all the intros and outros, I saved it as like one long 8-hour just one 8-hour long movie, and then I also changed it to black and white. So sometimes I'll put the black and white version on my TV and I'll watch Berserk 1997 in black and white without the sound while I read Berserk. I'll also obviously listen to the soundtrack as I read Berserk. I, like many people out there, I have a very, very deep love for this series and for the beautiful story that Kentaro Miura gave us. Rest in peace, man. Like that was tough to hear when he passed away. Is it like 4 or 5 years ago now? It was tough. He was a manga artist who kind of worked himself to death. The manga just kept getting bigger and bigger, and his art just kept getting better and better and more detailed, and it got to the point where it was almost photorealistic, and he worked himself basically to death, and it's really sad to see that because that's happened with not just him, it's happened with many other manga artists that are unfortunately worked almost like slaves because of the because of the runs, they have to have things out weekly, right? And it's just sad because he never got to complete his story. He's been writing Berserk since 1989. Since the 80s, this story has been going on. There have been people who've been born past that date, read Berserk, and have died since then. So we've lost people along the way. I don't know if it'll ever get finished. They're getting close now, and one of his best friends who knew the work very well is finishing it, and hopefully it'll be done within a decade. That's kind of what we've been promised, but I hope I'm around to see the finish of it, because it's quite a work. And just because it's not finished doesn't mean that you shouldn't pick it up. Like I said, the eclipse happens in like volume 4 of the deluxe novels, and that's pretty early on, and that's kind of like that's one of the big events. So yeah, I highly recommend reading it, collecting it, engaging with it. It's a brilliant piece of fiction, and I should probably stop there because I could talk about Berserk all day long. So I'll move on to my next shelf. And next up on this shelf here at the very top, we'll work our way down. This is my real life horror shelf. So this shelf to me is much more horrifying than the shelves I showed you before with Stephen King and Thomas Harris and all those other horror authors on it. Those books are scary when you're like 13, 14, 15 years old. When you're 23, 24, 25 years old, this is what terrifies you. This is basically a complete shelf of World War II history and history of, the worst dictators who ever lived and communism and all that stuff. So we'll start at the very top and we'll work our way down. So on the top shelf here, I have the Black Book of Communism, and actually just to the left of that, you can see a small book, which is the Communist Manifesto. We have Realities, Might and Paradox in the Soviet Union, Anthony Beevor's Russia. Highly recommend reading Anthony Beevor. He's one of the greatest historians of our time, especially if you're looking for a World War II historian. Anthony Beevor's at the top of my list for sure. So his book on Russia is fantastic. It covers the years of 1917 to 1921. Then we have Jung Chang's Mao. I made a Why You Should Read video on this book already. Highly, highly recommend it if you want to learn more about Mao. There's not a ton of great information out there about Mao because the CCP is still in power. The Soviet Union fell in the 90s. CCP is still going, right? So a lot of the information still behind closed doors. A lot of the archives are blocked off to the public, and they're also in Chinese, right? A lot of it's in Mandarin, so it's hard to decode and debunk and know what's what. But that's one of the best books that I've ever read when it comes to Mao. The Private Life of Chairman Mao is also fantastic. I don't own that one myself. We also have Bloodlands by Snyder. In the top 5 most horrifying books I've ever read in my life. It's there are some images that are seared on the front of my skull now from that book, especially in the first couple chapters when they talk about like going through some of these villages that have been starved to death and the sights that they saw. Horrifying book, horrifying, but it's an eye-opener. It's a splash of cold water in the face. I think everybody should read Bloodlands and to learn about what happened between Germany and Russia. I don't mean like what happened between the two countries. I mean, like, geographically, what happened between that location in the Bloodlands. That's what he calls that area, the Bloodlands. What happened in there in those years during the war? Because it needs to be told and it needs to be remembered. Millions of people died. Millions. And in horrific fashion. Then we have Red Star Over China by Edgar Snow, a bit of a complicated book. I wouldn't read this book immediately if you're looking for a book on communist China, because it is, you have to read it knowing what it is. So maybe I'll make a video in the future explaining exactly what that means and why you should read it eventually. Then we have Frank Decoter's trilogy, his trilogy on Mao, The Tragedy of Liberation, Mao's Great Famine and the Cultural Revolution. If you want to learn more about the effects that communism and Mao himself had on China, because Mao was a particularly nasty devil himself. If you want to learn more about those effects on China, this is the trilogy that you want to pick up. It's fantastically written, hyper detailed, and very well researched. Highly recommend it. Then we have Imperial Japan. Again, if you want to learn more about Imperial Japan, that's one of the best books I can point out to you guys. I kind of just picked it up on a whim at a thrift store. So I picked that book up, and very interesting to see how that empire kind of rose. Japan had an empire going there, and in the early 1940s, they were looking like they could become something. Like they might take over all of Asia. So it's very interesting to read about. And then we have Japan's infamous Unit 731. One fact from World War II history that I always find illuminating is that the Germans did experiments on about 30,000 people, if I'm getting my numbers right here. The Japanese did experiments on 300,000 people, and they were arguably more sadistic and more depraved. When you read Japan's infamous Unit 731, it's a book that crushes your soul. And same with the book that's next to it, which I can't even name the title of, but the Nanking book by Chang is, again, a book that had me in tears when I first read it. It crushed my soul. I was recovering for like 2 weeks after reading that book for the first time, because, I mean, that book drove the author to leave this world. You know, she ended her life early because of what she was reading about, the research that went into that book. It's a horrifying book. And like I said, there's a reason why I call this shelf my real world horror shelf, because it's a lot of these books have scarred me for life. Next to that, I have Hirohito and the Making of Modern Japan. It's probably the best book out there if you want to learn more about Hirohito and his life. Very, very interesting character, like very interesting. Everybody talks about Stalin and Mao and Hitler and Churchill, and Hirohito gets passed over, but he's just as interesting, if not more interesting, than all those characters. So that's the book that I would pick up to learn about him. And on the very end there, kind of squeezed in, I have Hiroshima. It's a little book, but it packs a mighty punch, just like Little Man. That's probably a insensitive joke, but it does pack a punch. This book blew me apart. Oh my god, I'm making horrible puns here. No, it did mess me up the first time that I read it, and it sent me down a rabbit hole of learning about the effects that those bombs had on the people of Japan, and the decision making that went behind dropping the bombs, and the targeting, like where are we dropping them? You know, just weather, last minute weather changed the course of one of those nukes from dropping. I believe it was supposed to go to Tokyo, and they had to reroute it, and that saved all those people. Just weather one day just saved all those people from being nuked. And I also highly recommend American Prometheus. I don't have it myself, but I highly recommend that novel. It's a brilliant read. It kind of goes over the life of Robert J. Oppenheimer, so it's more of a biography about him, but it does go over, you know, the impacts of what we did in 1945. Like, the world is now different. I've said this before, and I'll say it again many times. Before 1945, every single army throughout all of history used every single weapon they had. Their best weapons, their best gear, their best swords, their best guns, their best armor. The best was always deployed against the enemy. Now, it wasn't always total war. Most war isn't total war. Total war being like civilians are involved in manufacturing arms and like the whole country's weaponized. Not every war is like that. World War II obviously was, but pre-1945, every single army would deploy their most effective weapon. Past 1945, no army does that now, or at least not the major ones like Russia and the countries with nuclear weapons, right? So it's completely changed the world. It's completely changed the way armies work. It's completely altered everything. So I meditate about that a lot, and I think about, like, what was that like to be Robert J. Oppenheimer? You know, when he says that quote, you know, everybody's like, oh, it's such a badass quote when he says, I am become death. It's like that quote haunts me. That quote, like, makes me sad, because I try to put myself in his head, and I'm like, man, that would have been a decision. That would have been quite a load to put on your back. That's quite a responsibility to develop a weapon that changes the entire course of war. Anyways, I could talk about that event all day long. I apologize for my insensitive jokes, but fantastic book. I highly recommend it. Moving on, we have Stephen Kotkin's Stalin, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 3 is actually on the way soon. I believe it's coming out in a couple months. I believe it releases sometime this summer, either June, July, or August, and I can't wait for it. The first two books, some of the best biography writing I've ever come across in my life. I mean, truly a magnum opus of biographical historical work, like on another level. It reminds me of like reading like Tolstoy and War and Peace or something. Like, there's like an epic nature to this biography that Cotton's putting out, and I can't wait for Volume 3. I can't wait for it to conclude. It's going to be a trilogy that will probably be in my top trilogies of all time. It's one of the greatest works of history I've ever read in my life. I highly recommend it. If you want a biography to read about Stalin, pick up volume 1 and volume 2 of Stephen Cotton's work, and maybe you'll finish it just in time for volume 3 to come out. So past that, I have Stalin's Daughter. You can find interviews with her on YouTube, actually, and very interesting book. The Court of the Red Tsar is another great biography on Stalin. Then we have Stalin by Edvard Radzinsky, and you might be asking, why do you have 3 biographies on Stalin? Well, to me, that's not even enough. I've actually read more than just those 3. I've read, I think, 4 or 5 at this point. When you read about these historical characters, and for me, I'm particularly fascinated with dictators. I don't know why. It's because I think about evil and death like every single day. I don't know, it's just the way I'm wired. But when you learn about these characters, you don't want to just read one biography. You want to get multiple perspectives, and the more biographies you read on somebody, you start to connect, okay, this detail pops up in every single biography. That must be true. That must have happened. But then you find little anecdotes that are unique to each biographer, and sometimes they're really interesting stories, and you're like, man, that's really cool. Only that biographer's pointed that out about that person, and I really like that anecdote. Or you'll find things that, this seems consistent and this thing sticks out, and it seems like this biographer might be fudging this or making this up, or that this might not be completely correct. So you can kind of get a better understanding of a person's life if you read multiple biographies on them. Again, I don't think you should do that for every single person. Am I going to read like 13 biographies on Toshiro Mifune? Probably not. I love Toshiro Mifune, but like one biography on him is probably enough for me. But somebody like Stalin, somebody like Hitler, somebody like Mao, these are characters that I want to understand deeply, and I want to understand them as truthfully as I possibly can, so I read multiple biographies on them. I'm never satisfied if I've only read one biography on somebody as complicated as Stalin. So past that, I have Robert Service's Lenin. He also has a book on Stalin and Trotsky. I've read all 3, so I will get the Trotsky and the Stalin book eventually, but this is also a fantastic book on Lenin. There's one other biography that I've read on Lenin that I liked a little bit more, but I forget who wrote it. But this book by Robert Service is also fantastic. So his 3 biographies on Trotsky, Lenin, and Stalin, I think they're all about like $20 a piece. They're fairly cheap. So if you want good biographies on the 3 of them, you can pick those 3 up. And again, they all have kind of the same spine, so they look good on a shelf. And then after that, I have Anne Applebaum. I have 3 of her books. I have Red Famine, Gulag, and Iron Curtain. Gulag and Red Famine and Iron Curtain to a degree, but Gulag and Red Famine for sure are like very, very difficult reads. There's a lot of details in there. Again, seared images on my mind that will just never go away, but I'm glad they're there. They connect me with the history. I know these people's stories to some degree. We kind of take for granted that we live in the West. I mean, a lot of people watching this video probably live in the West, and we're on the good side of history. We won. Right, we won the Second World War, we won the Cold War, we were on the good side for that stuff. Again, it's hard to say good and bad, black and white like that, but you want to learn about what happened on the other side. Where did it go wrong? Why did they lose? Why did communism collapse into utter decay? Like, why exactly did that happen? Why exactly did Germany lose in World War I and in World War II? Why exactly did that happen? If you want to learn about these things, you kind of got to dive into the nitty-gritty details of it. And I think Anne Applebaum is one of the greatest writers alive today to kind of get into those nitty-gritty details and to bring them up to the surface. So I think she's won a Pulitzer Prize before. I believe that's true. And yeah, Red Famine, Gulag, Iron Curtain, recommend all 3. I recommend all of her works. I haven't read them all myself, but she seems to be a fantastic historian, and I really appreciate the work that she's done in bringing to light the Holodomor and the Gulag systems, which I was never taught about in school. So then on the very end, I have the Gulag Archipelago, the, of course, unabridged version, the only way to read it. It is a magnum opus, a masterpiece, and really, you have to slog through the unabridged version to get a true appreciation of the work. I don't recommend the abridged version at all. Like, I know some people will want to do it because it's a third of the length and it's a much easier way to get through the material, but please slug through the unabridged version, even if it takes a couple years. There's a fantastic audio version on YouTube of the unabridged version, split up into chapters, read by Frederick Davidson, one of the greatest audio recorders, one of the greatest book readers, I guess, of all time. I really appreciate his voice and the cadence that he brings to reading novels. And I think he did a great job with the Gulag Archipelago. So if you want an audio version, you can check that out on YouTube. If not, pick up the paperback copies and read through them, because the Gulag Archipelago is one of the three most important trilogies I've ever read in my life. Like, it's right up there with War and Peace and Lord of the Rings. Like, there's not many things I can put above it. I know it's a history. It's not even so much a history book. Some people don't even consider the Gulag Archipelago history because they say, well, there's no stats, like there's no evidence backing this up. Like, it's not really a scholarly work. But when you read through it, man, you know that it's true history. Like, Like, you don't read through this and go, I think this guy's making this all up. That just doesn't happen. The details that he shares, that no human being could make this up. Not even Lovecraft or Edgar Allan Poe. No sick mind could ever make up what Solzhenitsyn writes down in the Gulag Archipelago. Listening to the audiobook, I multiple times started crying. Just tearing up, crying in my car, listening to the audiobook. I multiple times had to pull over to the side of the road because I would get queasy and feel like I was going to throw up from some of the details laid out throughout this trilogy. It's gruesome, graphic, and horrifying. It's hard to get through at times, but if you slug through it, you get a vision of the other side. You get a vision of the archipelago. You get a vision of the decay and the corruption and all the death that came under that system. It's so important. It's one of the most important works ever written. I'm so glad that he memorized all of that he wrote down the transcripts in exile, that he brought it back, that he got it published. He went through all the effort to get it out there. And it's so important that it's out there, and more people need to read it. So the Gulag Archipelago, out of all of the books on all of my shelves, is like in the top 3 or 5 most important books that I think everybody should read. Again, it's not for everybody. It's, what is it, like 2,500 pages or something like that of just pure gruesome, graphic, horrific details of the worst system ever devised, second to Mao's China, I would say. And I could talk about it forever. I'll have a Why You Should Read video on the Gulag Archipelago out soon. And I'll have multiple videos covering the psychology of it, covering the history of it, picking it apart here and there and picking apart stories. And I could talk about it forever, so I'll move on. Next up, we have this shelf here, the almost all orange shelf. One day this will be all orange. I'll get a couple more books. I think there's a couple by Anthony Beaver that I'm missing that do have orange spines, so eventually this will be a full orange shelf, which will be cool. But on the very end there, I have Albert Speer, His Battle with Truth, and Inside the Third Reich, Memoirs with Albert Speer. So if you want to learn about Albert Speer, which is a very interesting character to learn about, especially going through his interviews, learning exactly what he said about the man, very, very fascinating if you want to learn more about Adolf Hitler. You need to read about Speer. And I would read both of these books together, because if you read Inside the Third Reich, which is one of the greatest history books I think ever penned, I think it's a very essential book. If you read it just by itself, you can get a little bit lost sometimes, because just the way he talks about the man, like you almost want a companion book to go with it. And I think Albert Speer, His Battle with Truth, if you read both of those together, I think you'll get a pretty comprehensive look at Albert Speer's life and his views on Adolf Hitler, obviously. So after that, I have Hitler's Scientists, a fantastic book, highly recommend it. Hitler's Empire, very underrated book. This one doesn't get brought up enough, but it's very well written. And then we have 2 books by Anthony Beaver, Stalingrad and D-Day. I would say that the D-Day book is probably my favorite book that I've ever read on D-Day. It's pretty comprehensive. It's very well written. It's got all the right details in there and not too much fluff. Stalingrad's also fantastic, but there is a book by David M. Glantz. It's a trilogy. I think there's 4 books, but I think it's technically a trilogy covering Stalingrad. And then it's also been abridged down into an audiobook that's free on Audible if you have an Audible subscription. It doesn't cost a credit to listen to the abridged audiobook, but the full work is, I think, 4 books long, and it covers basically just the campaign of Stalingrad in like the most detail you could possibly want. It's incredibly detailed, like a true military history. I think it's David M. Glantz that wrote that one. So that's probably the best Stalingrad book that I've read, but underneath that, Stalingrad's a great one to pick up. If you're more of a casual reader and you don't want to read like over 2,000 pages about one single battle or campaign, it's a pretty big battle. Stalingrad, millions of people were fighting in that. Next up after that, I have the Richard J. Evans Third Reich trilogy. This is the definitive work if you want to read about the Third Reich. I love Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It's fantastic. We'll talk about it in a second, but it's dated. And if you want something that's modern, up to date, has all of the relevant information, and is very well written by a respected historian who doesn't fudge things and try to make an alternative narrative for history, like David Irving does sometimes. I had a lot of respect for David Irving for a while because he is a brilliant historian. You have to give him that. He's a very intelligent, very scholarly historian, but he does shift things into a narrative that he has pre-crafted, and it is bad history. Some of his books are technically bad history, and there's a famous court case between Richard J. Evans and David Irving where David Irving, I think, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for his anti-Semitic and Holocaust denial claims. So Richard J. Evans, on the other hand, is still respected because he is a good historian. He's truthful, and he doesn't have a preloaded narrative that he's trying to fit facts to. David Irving, as great as he is, there's a lot of problems with his history. So Richard J. Evans is much more reliable, and he has kind of the definitive work when it comes to studying the Third Reich. This is one of the most cited works across all history books on World War II is the Third Reich trilogy by Richard J. Evans. It's fantastic. So if you want an in-depth analysis of the Third Reich and how it operated, there's no better place than Richard J. Evans. Then I have Hitler and the Vatican, also a pretty good book. There's another book that I read about Hitler and the Pope, and I would read both books alongside each other because they have slightly differing perspectives. But Hitler and the Vatican is also a great book. And then Masters of Death on the end there is, everybody needs to read that one. It goes over the history of the SS Eisengruppen and how they formed, how exactly they carried out their operations, and also a very horrifying book. A lot of details in there have shocked me and will stay, again, seared on my skull for the rest of my life, but I highly recommend Masters of Death as well. So let's move on to the next shelf. Moving one shelf down here, and I have, I don't know if you guys can see this binoculars that's covering the symbol that I can't show on camera, but that's why that's there, if you're wondering why I'm blocking some of the books. This shelf is where I have the majority of my Hitler content. So I have Ian Kershaw's Hitler, the two-part biography, Hubris and Nemesis, which is Kershaw's often referred to as Hitler's biographer for a reason. He kind of wrote the definitive biography, but right next to that is Hitler by Volker Ulrich, Ascent and Downfall, which is also fantastic because it's newer. I believe it came out in 2015, 2017, and it's got access to some diaries and stuff that Kershaw didn't. So it's a little bit more updated, and it goes a little bit more into the psychology of the man, whereas Kershaw goes a little bit more into like the political realm. I feel like Ulrich goes a little bit more into the psychological realm. So that's how I would defer those two, but they're both fantastic, and I recommend reading both. Again, like I said with Stalin, it's good to read multiple biographies on somebody if you really want to understand them. A.H. is probably the man who I understand the most throughout all of history. I have 3 direct biographies here on this shelf, but I've read probably 10 already. I've read Fest, his biography on Hitler. I've read Bullock's. I've read Longreich's, and I've read a couple other ones. I can't even remember all the names, but I've read about 10 purely biographies just on AH at this point. So the one after that is Toland, John Toland's book on Hitler. It's not as harsh on Hitler as much. It tries to paint him a little bit more personably and it tries to get you in line with who the man was himself as like a personal human being. So it has a lot of anecdotes that I like, stuff that makes you relate to him a little bit more as a human being rather than just some outside devil that's just horrible and you can never imagine that person as a human being. Toland humanizes Hitler in a lot of ways, so I find him to be a useful biographer as well. Obviously, I've also read Hitler's War by David Irving, which is somewhat a Hitler's biography. Not really. It kind of just goes over the war years, but that one also had, interesting points throughout it that I found useful, but also there's some history in there that's skewered and gerrymandered to kind of fit his narrative. So you got to be cautious with reading Irving for sure. Next to that, I have The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William L. Shirer. Obviously, probably the greatest World War II book ever written. We're never going to get a book like that again. Shirer was on location. You know, he was a journalist that was going around. I think he stood like feet away from Hitler at multiple points. And yeah, he had a very unique perspective, being a war correspondent on the scene. You know, taking down facts and information as he's seeing them develop in front of his own eyes. So there's problems with it. It's dated, and we have a lot of new information that kind of counters some of his claims, but it's not bad history by any means, and you should still read it. It's still fantastic, and it's written beautifully, like really a really beautifully written book. Next to that, I have Hitler's Table Talk. It's not perfect. There are a couple translation issues, but some people overreact to that and they think that the whole book's garbage for that reason. It's not. There is a lot of accurate information in the book, but there is some problems with translation. Some things are exaggerated here and there. It's not perfect. Hitler's Table Talk is definitely not a perfect book. Hitler and His Generals, next to that, on the other hand, is a much better book. It's a little bit better researched. The translation's a little bit more accurate. And that's also by David M. Glantz, who did the Stalingrad books that I referenced earlier. He's a fantastic historian. So Hitler and His Generals, if you want to get the words from the man himself, I think Hitler and His Generals and Hitler's Table Talk are both great to read, but Hitler and His Generals, like I said, slightly more reliable. And then we have Defying Hitler at the very end there, another fantastic read. Not as strong as the previous books, but still I would also recommend that book as well. And then we have to move on to the bottom shelf of this real-life horror shelf, so we're almost done. On the last shelf, I have Exorcising Hitler, A Writer at War by Vasily Grossman, Beyond the Band of Brothers, The Battle for the Mediterranean, Norman Ohler's Blitz. I have Man's Search for Meaning, Night by Elie Wiesel. I have Lawrence Rees's Auschwitz. I also have Auschwitz by Dr. Miklos. I have Anne Frank's Diary. I have A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Solzhenitsyn. There's Ordinary Men, Hitler's Willing Executioners, The Grape of Europa, The Holocaust by Lawrence Rees, Primo Levi or Levi, I don't know how you say it, but If This Is Man, and at the very end there I have Escape. So yeah, there's the rest of my World War II books, kind of a mix between absolute classics and essential literature and a few books that aren't as strong. I might get rid of eventually when I find more World War II books that I want to add to my shelf, like The Battle of the Mediterranean there is not the strongest book ever. Escape is a fantastic book, but it's not, again, the strongest book on my shelf. So those I could eventually see myself letting go of, but the rest of the books on this shelf I think are absolutely necessary. Vasily Grossman, highly, highly recommend reading his writing again. Another war correspondent, a war journalist that was on the scene looking at things as they were playing out. So he's also kind of like Shirer. You want to read his perspective because he was there in the war. I also like Blitz. There's also another one called Tripped that's also about, the Nazis and drugs. Not perfect book. The information's useful, and I think it's pretty well researched, but it does take It does over exaggerate the use of drugs in Nazi Germany. There seems to be this idea now with the popularization of this book, with Joe Rogan having the guy on his podcast and talking about the book so often, that the Nazis only were successful at the start of the war because they were on meth. Not true in the slightest, not even remotely true. Meth was a very small part of their success. So I would highly recommend reading more than just Blitzed if you want to understand. Read like the Third Reich trilogy by Richard J. Evans. Then you'll understand just how well oiled of a machine the Third Reich actually was. After that, I have obviously Man's Search for Meaning and Night. Both of those incredibly moving books. I highly recommend them. Lawrence Rees is a brilliant author, one of the most highly respected historians, I guess, when it comes to the Holocaust and Auschwitz. Both of those books are fantastic. I would read Ordinary Men and Hitler's Willing Executioners together. They kind of also make for a good double feature. And Anne Frank's Diary, I'm sure everybody's read that. If you haven't read that in school, your school did you a injustice, and I would definitely go out and seek Anne Frank's Diary. That's a book that everybody should read at some point in their life. And A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich as well. I think I think that's on par with Anne Frank's diary, and it doesn't get read nearly as much. So Solzhenitsyn, I can never say his name properly. Solzhenitsyn is always overlooked, and he definitely needs more respect. I highly recommend Cancer Ward, The First Circle. There's a bunch of books by him that I don't own myself, but I have read. And he's, like I said with the Gulag Archipelago, one of the most important writers of the last 150 years. So yeah, I think that concludes my real life horror shelf. We'll move on to the final shelf there at the very end, which is just more assorted history. And then we got the TV books. We got the books to the side. We still got a bit of stuff to cover, so I apologize if this video is running a bit long. All right, let's work through the last history shelf up there. I have, I think, 2 shelves in a row here. This one, this one, and the one next to it are just history books. So I think it's pretty easy to tell that my most consumed genres are the classics, whether you consider that just classical literature or classic history as well, and history. That's what I read the most. So at the very top there, I have Napoleon Bonaparte by Alan Shum. I have the Napoleonic Wars. I have Revolution, Monarchy and Revolution by Philip Mansil. I have Iron Kingdom, The Peninsula War, Andrew Roberts' Napoleon the Great, Peter H. Wilson's Europe's Tragedy, C.V. Wedgwood's The 30 Years' War, and Thomas Asperger's The Crusades, which I have made a Why You Should Read video on, and I will have a Why You Should Read video on Napoleon the Great out soon because it's my favorite Napoleon biography of all time. Andrew Roberts is one of my favorite historians ever. I really, really like his work. His book on Churchill is also fantastic. Some of the books that I really like there are Peter H. Wilson's and C.V. Wedgwood's books on the 30 Years' War, Europe's Tragedy and the 30 Years' War. Those are the 2 best books I've ever read on the 30 Years' War. So if you want to learn more about that period, I would read both of those books. They're both fantastic. And it's the 30 Years' War, man. Like, I forget how many people died in that. It was like 8 million or something was like the up number. It's like between 4 and 8 million people died. Crazy, and nobody teaches about it. I've never taught about the 30 Years' War once in my 12 plus years of schooling, like never brought up once. So it's a period of history I think everybody should read about. You know, Europe was plunged into total war basically, and it was tragic. It was horrifying. And yeah, I highly recommend reading those 2. Iron Kingdom's fantastic if you want to learn more about the history of Germany. The Napoleonic Wars is probably the best book I've ever read if you want to just cover the wars, like the military history of Napoleon's reign. I would recommend the Napoleonic Wars. And then Alan Shum's book on Napoleon Bonaparte. Not the greatest biography ever. There's another Adam something with a Z, but he also wrote another great book on Napoleon. I also like that one. I want to get that one on my shelf as well. I want multiple biographies on Napoleon because I think he's arguably the greatest man who ever lived. But I'm also French, so I have some bias. But the Alan Shum one is actually, it's more of a negative biography, actually. It takes a little bit more, takes a few more jabs at Napoleon. It doesn't paint him in the best light, whereas Andrew Roberts really lifts him up as the great figure that he is. So I like having both perspectives, even though I think Napoleon's great. I thought he was a fantastic leader. I'm pretty high on him, all things considered, so I like having both perspectives to kind of balance me out that way. Next up, we have assorted biographies. So I have Carlson's Tesla, like I mentioned before, Andrew Roberts' Churchill. I have Leonardo da Vinci, Einstein, and Benjamin Franklin, all by Walter Isaacson. I don't have his Elon Musk or his Steve Jobs book yet. Those are more modern day geniuses. I will eventually get around to collecting those 2 books, but I love Walter Isaacson's work, and his books on Benjamin Franklin, Einstein, and da Vinci have been very helpful to me. Then I also have a book on Cochrane. I also need a book on Nelson eventually, but Cochrane's also a very interesting character to read about. I have Revolutionary, George Washington at War, which is kind of just a book about Washington at war. It's not like a full biography on George Washington. I would recommend Ron Chernow's biography if you want a bio on George Washington. I don't have Chernow's biographies yet, but I want to get them all. Like, I want Titan. I want all of his biographies because Chernow is a terrific biographer as well. And then I also have Eric Larson, one of my favorite historians, The Splendid and the Vile, Dead Wake, and on the very end I have The Devil in the White City, which kind of goes over H.H. Holmes and his career. That guy was sick. That's quite the story to read about. Dead Wake is fantastic. Just the way that Eric writes is just so engaging. I also have Paris 1919, very important book, especially if you want to understand World War II. Very important to understand World War I, why it played out like it did, why Germany lost. You know, there's some people who argue, I believe it's Niall Ferguson, who argues that, you know, if Germany won World War I, we could have avoided quite a bit of catastrophe in the latter half of that century, and in World War II and whatnot, that it might not have happened, World War II, if Germany won the First World War. And you can argue that they should have. They outperformed everybody on the battlefield. But yeah, Germany, you could argue, could have won that war and maybe should have won that war. And it's an interesting perspective to look at. And Paris 1919 kind of lays out the Treaty of Versailles and the aftermath of World War I a bit. So I would highly recommend looking into that and just researching like what happened in World War I, because so many people, they gravitate towards World War II, and I get it. The characters are more flamboyant, and it's more black and white almost, right? There's a bad guy and good guy, whereas in World War I, it's like, yeah, you can say Germany's bad, but not really. There's some good cases to be made for Germany too. It was surrounded on all sides and kind of brought into the war from Austria-Hungary. And then Russia gets into the war, and then Germany's kind of forced into it. So it's a complex situation. I can't cover the entire history of World War I here in my library tour video, obviously, but I would definitely read more about it, especially the Battle of the Somme and stuff like that, like a 4-month battle where 2 million, 3 million people engaged in it, and like 100, or no, it's like I think 1 million casualties in the Battle of the Somme. Like hundreds of thousands of people died. Crazy. On the next shelf here, I have kind of a sorted history. None of my shelves are really organized well on this side, but I have the American Civil War. I have the Civil War by Shelby Foote, an amazing trilogy, very engaging. Shelby Foote does a great job of putting you, I can't even say this. I tried saying this in my Civil War video and I messed this up. I'm going to mess it up again. He puts you in the shoes of the soldiers. The shoes of the soldiers. In the shoes of the soldiers is what I'm trying to say. And he gives you a perspective that's very unique, and it's a very engaging work. One of the greatest, if not the greatest, historical narrative I've ever read in my life. And some people say that he's a little bit too lenient or a little bit too gentle to the Confederates, but I like having both perspectives. Again, there's a lot of Civil War books that are just Confederates bad and evil and Union good and saintly, and it's like, well, yes, but also kind of detail out the full perspective for me, you know? And I think Shelby Foote does a good job of that. But if you want the best one-volume history on the Civil War, the book next to it, McPherson's Battle Cry for Freedom, is highly regarded as the greatest history book on the Civil War, especially if you want one volume to cover the whole thing. So yeah, I've already made a Why You Should Read video on that if you guys want to go check that out. And then I also have the Romanovs next to that, detailing out the 300-year history of one of the greatest empires in world history, the Russian Empire and the Romanovs that ran it. Very interesting book. Simon Sebag Montefiore, I hope I'm saying that name right. He also did The Court of the Red Tsar on a couple shelves above or to the side, a couple shelves back when I talked about The Court of the Red Tsar. He did both books. So then next to that, we have Max Hastings' Vietnam, the greatest single volume work on the Vietnam War. If you want one book to cover the entire history of the Vietnam War, Max Hastings is the way to go. He also has a book called Inferno, which covers basically the entire history of World War II. Also a fantastic book, but I would almost never pick up, well, I shouldn't say this because I read lots of books like this, but if you're going to read a one-volume history on World War II, you're going to have a very, very, very shallow understanding of World War II. I've at this point read hundreds of books on World War II, and I feel like a dummy when it comes to World War II. You know, I'm not a historian. I don't have deep expertise. I still feel like there's lots for me to learn when it comes to that conflict. So make sure you're just reading multiple books on every subject. That message keeps getting put out here throughout this video, but I hope it resonates for you guys. Like, you can't just read one book and know about that subject. You got to read multiple. And even then, you probably don't know much about that subject. You got to get in contact with archives, interviews, get your hands on artifacts and stuff like that. And it takes a long time to become a historian, so I always separate myself from them. I am not a historian. I look up to them. at most. So past that, I have a couple of books here on Native American history. I have Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Empire of the Summer Moon, Killers of the Flower Moon, and The Trail of Tears. So I did a Why You Should Read video for Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And I mentioned the two books there. I mentioned Empire of the Summer Moon and Killers of the Flower Moon, which I also highly recommend. I'll have Why You Should Read videos on both of those sometime in the future. Trail of Tears is also a really good book, but it's a little bit dated. So that one, I don't think I might have briefly mentioned it in my Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee video, but all four of those books, that's kind of what I've read when it comes to Native American history. I might have put my hands on a couple other ones like Crazy Horse, and I think there's one or two other ones that I've picked up, but I need to read more about that time period and that history because it's very important. I live on that land, right? I live on Native American land. I'm in Canada. We have different tribes up here, of course, but I want to learn more about who possessed this land before my ancestors kind of came and took it over. Actually, fun little fact I'll just splice in here. My family actually got to Canada in the late 1500s, early 1600s. So I believe my family's been here for over 400 years at this point. Now, that's just on my mom's side of the family. They're all French. On my dad's side, I have German, French, and I think a bit of English. It's harder to find my ancestry roots on my dad's side for some reason, but I think they came over more in the 1800s. But I do have some family that traces back in Canada all the way back 400 years, which is pretty cool. But then you think of Native Americans who can trace their lineage back thousands of years on this land. So that's pretty interesting. But let's move on to the next shelf. And we have more kind of assorted history here. I have 1776, the Silk Roads, Guns, Germs, and Steel, the Last Day of the Incas, which I just recently made a Why You Should Read video on, Shake Hands with the Devil, Killing Kennedy, Manhunt, The Six Wives of Henry VIII, The Guns of August by Barbara W. Tuckman. I have The Plantagenets by Dan Jones. I have Genghis Khan. I have SPQR and The 10 Caesars. I also recently made a video on why you should read SPQR. Fantastic book if you just want to get into Roman history. It covers about 800 years of history. So if you really want to learn about ancient Rome, if you want to learn about the Roman Republic, the Roman Empire, I would engage with those primary sources up there at the top that I went over earlier. That's kind of the best way to do it, in my opinion. So 10 Caesars is also fantastic. Some of the books on this shelf are a little bit weaker. Some of them I'm kind of looking to move off of my shelf sometime in the future when I get stronger books. You know, not every book that I collect I'm looking to keep forever. I would say 99.9% of the books on these shelves here I am looking to keep forever. Some of the books under my TV, some of the books in the cubby over there, I'm kind of looking to move some of them out as I bring new ones in because I only have a one-bedroom apartment right now. I can only fit so much. I said before that I wouldn't stop collecting books ever, and I would rather sleep on books than stop collecting them, but I don't think sleeping on hardcover books would be very comfortable, so I gotta move some stuff out of my house over time. I also really like Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's not a perfect history book. Obviously, it's more of like an anthropology book, but it's a very useful book, I find, obviously, if you take it for what it is. And The Silk Roads as well, similar kind of book. If you take it for what it is, The Silk Roads is also a fantastic read. Lots of useful information in there. And yeah, let's move on to the next shelf. And at the very bottom, I kind of have a little bit of continued World War II history here. So I have A War to Be Won, which is a one-volume history on World War II. I have Juno Beach, which kind of covers Canada's D-Day invasion. I have Hastings Overlord, which covers, obviously, Operation Overlord. I have Warsaw, 1944. I also have Forgotten. I have John Keegan's The Second World War. I have A Higher Call, Long Shadows, A Bridge Too Far. I have The War of the World, The Beauty and the Sorrow, 1917, and Flags of Our Fathers. So yeah, kind of a sorted World War II history there. I know I said before that I wouldn't read a one-volume history on World War II. That's completely BS because I read many of them, and I would recommend you read many of them. But you're going to get a compacted version, obviously. But the John Keegan and Niall Ferguson World War II histories there are fantastic. A War to Be Won is very engaging as well. Other books that I like on there are The Beauty and the Sorrow. It kind of details out World War I, and it does it through letters, which is really beautiful. And it's a very personal book. It gets you grounded in, again, I'm going to say this phrase and mess it up, in the shoes of the soldiers puts you in the shoes of the soldiers. It makes you almost feel like you're in the trenches a little bit. So I really like that book. It's very, very well written. Peter England did a fantastic job with it. So yeah, that kind of concludes the bookshelves now. So now we can move on to what's underneath the TV, the little cubby. And I might even have some magazines or something kicking around that I might show you guys. I got some magazines from like the 1950s and 60s that are a little interesting. So I'll pop those out at the end. And like I said, I'll show you guys the Bible that I keep by my bed. So let's look at what's underneath my TV in front of me now. So taking a look at what's underneath my TV, I have 3 of the Aragon books. I don't have book 4 because growing up, I only read these 3. I also have a hardcover of Inkheart. I have the 3 hardcovers of the Hunger Games trilogy. I have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I have Holes, the selected works of Joseph Conrad. I have Sir Walter Scott's Rob Roy. I have Lord of the Flies and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, one of my favorite spy novels of all time. And yeah, I said before that I had the collected works of Joseph Conrad. He's one of my favorite writers of all time too. I really, really like Heart of Darkness. I've read it multiple times now. It seems like every time I go on vacation, I always bust that one out and reread it or listen to the audiobook. I love To Killing a Mockingbird and Lord of the Flies. Obviously, I read both of those in school. The Hunger Games trilogy there, that was one of the first books I was ever gifted. I think it was like right before the film came out. My grandpa gave them to me. That's a trilogy of books. And I remember reading them before the film came out. Went and saw Hunger Games. Saw it again in theaters, saw it again in theaters. I saw it like 4 times in a row because I loved it so much the first time it came out. Second movie, still pretty good. Third movie, I'm starting to lose interest a little bit. But I really liked those books when I first read them. And yeah, I had very engaging experience with them. And Aragon, I'm saving for my children. I don't think I'll ever reread them. Same with Inkheart. Same with the Hunger Games, honestly. I don't know if I'll ever reread them, but I want to pass them down to my children because I had such great experiences with them. And then moving on a little bit to the right there. Here we have The Tiger, Life of Pi, Lion, Slumdog Millionaire, The Perfect Storm, Beyond the Blue Horizon, and The Wager. We also have below that the collected works of Rummy. I have Vanity Fair. Next to that, I have Think and Grow Rich, The Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. I have The Historical Figure of Jesus, Paul Unbound, and above that, I have what I have for physics right now, which is not much, but I have The Elegant Universe and The Fabric of the Cosmos by Brian Greene. I also have Neil deGrasse Tyson's quadrilogy here of books, Space Chronicles, The Pluto Files, Death by Black Hole, and Origins. And I love the way the spines connect there and form that little nebula. And right next to those books, you can kind of see tucked in there, I have Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. So that's kind of tucked in there. You can't really see the spine of it, which I apologize. So yeah, that's kind of all that I have for physics books at the moment, which is unfortunate. I only have like 6 or 7 of them. That's just really the books that got me interested in physics, that got me into reading it deeper. I was reading those books in like junior high, high school, and now I'm kind of more into reading Schrodinger, Paul Dirac. I'm trying to get deeper into the weeds. And like I said before, I'm not a physicist. I don't understand it perfectly. I need a lot of help in breaking it down, but I'm always constantly trying to push myself and to learn new subjects and to learn things that are challenging. And for me, physics is kind of as challenging as it gets. Physics and mathematics is kind of the peak of the mountain for me. They're the subjects that require the most effort when I'm trying to study them. History I can read, and it's a breeze for me because I'm so interested in it. But for other subjects, I kind of have to force myself a little bit to really study it. And I really try to do that because that's what you're taught in school, right? They kind of force you, like you have to learn math, you have to learn biology, you have to learn chemistry. And, you get later in life and you don't force yourself to do that anymore, and you never grow out those realms of knowledge. And I'm always trying to expand my realms of knowledge. So I'm always trying to force myself to learn things that I don't necessarily want to learn about, or that don't always necessarily engage me right away. So physics has always been engaging for me. It's kind of more biology, chemistry, and mathematics where I start to lose a little bit of interest. But physics, man, is a very interesting subject, obviously. And I'll have many videos about physics in the future when I have a little bit more of expertise and I have a little bit more to say on the subject, and I could talk with air like I know what I'm talking about. I definitely want to make a video on the Boltzmann brain and that idea, and and exactly what it means and all that. So you can expect some videos on physics in the future too. It won't be just theology and philosophy and psychology. I'm going to try to branch out into other sciences as well. So yeah, I have a couple physics books there that kind of reflect my interest in that. I also have, to the left of that, I have some books that were turned into films, some weaker books. I really like The Wager. I'll probably keep that one. It was a very interesting book. But books like Life of Pi, Slumdog Millionaire, The Lion, I'll probably get rid of them eventually. They were books that I kind of grew up reading, and I haven't really touched them since. The Tiger was an exhilarating read. It was a true story about a tiger that slaughtered a bunch of people, but interesting read. But I don't know if I'll keep it in the future. Some of these books I'm kind of looking to move out at some time. Some of them I want to keep forever, like the physics books I'll probably keep forever. Rummy, it's in not the greatest shape. It's again a secondhand book, but I'll probably keep it forever because I love reading that. And Paul Unbound, the historical figure of Jesus, I've read those and they're very, very interesting. I almost need to re-engage with them, so I'll probably keep those around. And yeah, some of these books here are like keeps, and some of them are like, we'll see. We'll see if I get anything stronger in, and I might get rid of them. But moving on to the last little bit under my TV here. So the last section under my TV houses some books that I definitely want to keep, and they're some of my favorite books. They just don't really fit into my shelves anywhere nicely, so they're unfortunately underneath my TV. But I have The Boy Crisis, which I bought because I took the course on the Peterson Academy. I really enjoyed it, and I thought, you know what, I want to read the book that the professor wrote. So I read The Boy Crisis, and I thought it was a very important read for me. It's something that I'll probably talk about more on this channel, what exactly the book goes over. I'll make a Why You Should Read video on the book, obviously, but I'll probably also make some videos talking about The Boy Crisis, because I'm making videos on the modern dating crisis, so I'll probably make some videos kind of directed towards young men and boys, and people that are younger than me. So yeah. Past that, I have Yuval Noah Harari's, I have Sapiens, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and Homo Deus. Those books are quite good. I started reading them in high school. I don't know. I'll probably come back to Sapiens, maybe Homo Deus, but I don't know if I'll reread 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. That might have been like a one-off read for me, but I like Harari. There are some things that I think he does very, very well, and I think he's definitely a useful writer to engage with, but there's also some things that I disagree with him on, or I don't think that his methodology is perfect, but yeah, he's a very interesting writer, and I learned a lot from Sapiens the first time that I read it, but since then, obviously, I've gone a little bit deeper into the history of humanity, and that the book's good, but it's not perfect. Again, it's almost like SPQR. It's a really good book, but if you want to learn about the history of humanity or the history of the Roman Empire, you gotta go deeper than just one book, right? So again, that's kind of the lesson throughout this video. Read as much as you can. Below that, I have a few military history books. So I have 12 Strong, American Sniper. I have For Your Tomorrow, Fearless, and Lone Survivor. So those more modern military history books I got into around the time that the American Sniper film came out. I was so deep entrenched in reading about World War I, World War II, the Civil War, the Napoleonic Wars, all these old ancient wars, Roman history and stuff like that, that I wanted to read something that was modern, that just happened, that happened in my lifetime. I wanted to read war now, if that makes any sense. So I started reading books like this, and this is just a fraction of some of the books that I read, but I started picking up every book that I could that had a Navy SEAL as the author or anything like that, and I just wanted to read more about modern war history. So I think that's an interesting place to branch out to, because I think a lot of people read, World War II, World War I, that old military history. Sometimes we neglect modern military history because we just think, well, it's happening now, it's current events, it's not really history. But it is history. It's history in the making, right? So I want to learn about the Iraq War. I want to learn about Afghanistan. I want to learn about Russia and Afghanistan. I want to learn, how did these wars develop? How did they differ? How did the technology progress? I want to know this stuff, and it helps inform my political views. So I would highly recommend not just reading about World War I, World War II, old history. Read modern history as well. Read things that are happening now. So yeah, and then above that, I have obviously my Jordan Peterson collection. I have Beyond Order, 12 Rules for Life, We Who Wrestle with God, and Maps of Meaning. So his 4 books there. My favorite being Maps of Meaning. I think it's his deepest, his densest. I think he goes the furthest in that book. We Who Wrestle with God is brilliant. It's kind of a condensed, compacted version of Maps of Meaning, kind of put in a way that's more accessible to the average reader. But I still think Maps of Meaning is his best work. I think if he does go down as a great philosopher of our day, which I don't know if he will. It's impossible to say. You can never call yourself a philosopher while you're living, because that title only gets given to you after you're dead, I feel like. But we never know. We never know. Maybe he will be considered a philosopher for our day. Whether you agree with what he says or whether you disagree with what he says. I agree with a lot of the things that he says, but there are things that he talks about. There's a lot of political stances that he has that I don't share, that I disagree with him on. And yeah, like I was saying, if he goes down as one of the greatest philosophers of our day, I think Maps of Meaning will be kind of his magnum opus. That'll be his critique of pure reason, or his Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I think that'll be his major work, because I think that's where he went the furthest. But We Who Wrestle with God's also great. I made a book review video for that if you guys want more information about it. But yeah, obviously coming from Edmonton, being interested in psychology, Jordan Peterson has been a huge influence on my life. That should be evident from my channel. I'm taking the Peterson Academy. I'm reviewing courses. So yeah, I appreciate Jordan Peterson. I love his books. I don't mean to just shove them under my TV. They should be on my shelves, honestly, but I didn't know exactly where to put them. I'm kind of in a spot right now where they don't really have anywhere to go. But yeah, that kind of concludes the books that are underneath my TV, some of which I'll keep forever, some of which I'm kind of looking to move out of my apartment soon when I get better books. But let's move on to the cubby to the side, which has some of my picture books, some of my atlases and textbooks, and yeah, some of my more difficult reads. So we'll move on to that. So yeah, I have this little cubby off to the side here. You can see I have a little plant there, a little spider plant that my cat loves to mess around with. That little chessboard to the right of it is actually my great-grandmother's. She willed it to me when she passed away at, I think she was 99 years old. I used to play it at her place as a kid. I would just move the pieces around, not really knowing what to do with them. And then as I got a little bit older, I started getting some chess books for Christmas, and chess has become a huge part of my life ever since. And that chessboard I've been connected to it since a little kid. And then next to that is a little bulldog that also goes back pretty far in my family. That was my either great-grandfather's or my great-great-grandfather's. That's also a piece that's, I think, 100 years old. So yeah, a couple interesting pieces there. But in the bookshelves underneath there, we have a Webster's Dictionary, which my grandfather gave to me, and I use that quite often. That's my nice one. On the very far right, you see another Webster's Dictionary. I have 2 just because can never have too many dictionaries, but I have 2 Webster's Dictionaries. Beneath the nice one on the left, you see the Royal Air Force, the Pacific War, German military aircraft, the Great War, the Entertainers, Russian Imperial Style, Ludwig von Beethoven, and The World We Live In, a Life magazine book. And then next to that, stacked vertically, we have the Romanov's Russian-English Dictionary and a Russian course book. So I told you guys earlier that I'm currently trying to learn Russian, and Duolingo's great, but you can't just use Duolingo. I also have those 2 books. I also have a cassette of like Russian lessons that I listen to sometimes, and it helps, but I'm not great at it. I'm learning a new alphabet. It's difficult. And then next to that, I have Tacitus's The Annals, which is just another copy of it. Like I said, I have a copy up here on the top shelf. So I'm just really looking for the right person in my life to give that to, whether it be a family member or a friend or a cousin. But Tacitus is a little bit more difficult to give off to somebody. Not that it's difficult. I find it incredibly engaging, but it's a little bit of a difficult book to recommend. I can give like The Alchemist to anybody, right? Because it's like the book that kind of gets you into reading philosophy. You kind of branch out from there, and it's an easy read, and it's short, and it's accessible. But Tacitus's Annals is not as accessible. So I'm just waiting for the right person for that. And then next to that, you can see 2 black books there where I have some of my writings in. I have poetry that I've written. I'm currently working on a book of poetry dedicated to Joan of Arc. She is a very important figure in my life. She's kind of the saint that I look up to the most. Being French and just being a history nut and learning about the 100 Years' War and whatnot, she's She's somebody who I can rarely talk about without tearing up. Joan of Arc holds a special place in my heart. So I have some poetry in those books about Joan. I have a couple short stories that I've been working on, and my main novels, like my big novels, I keep on my laptop. But some of the more shorter stuff, like poetry, song lyrics, short stories, I keep handwritten in those black leather journals. So maybe some of that stuff will get published one day. Who knows? I don't know if I'll ever publish any of my fictional work, but we'll see. Maybe one day. I'm working on a sci-fi novel right now, actually. That's quite interesting. It's a cross between Annihilation, Roadside Picnic, and Solaris. It's like a Lovecraftian cosmic horror, but it's got some Canadian elements to it. I don't know. I think it's interesting. I'm working on it. I don't want to spoil anything because I might share it with you guys eventually. But yeah, those are just a couple of my books. I have most of my notebooks are over there kind of just stacked up messily, so I won't show you guys that. But that's just a couple of my notebooks. It's important to buy notebooks, have them around. Like I said, it's important to read, but it's also important to write. If you don't read, you'll never fill your head up with any good ideas, but if you never write, you'll always live by the ideas of others. So make sure you always write as well. Like, write what you think about your favorite books and all that stuff. You know, you don't have to write fiction. You can write nonfiction, but write whatever comes to you, whatever comes from your heart. If it's song lyrics, poetry, if it's fiction, if it's nonfiction, if it's essays, whatever it might be, just make sure that you're constantly writing all the time. So yeah, out of those books on that shelf, the Webster's Dictionary is obviously valuable to me. My black notebooks are very valuable to me. The Ludwig von Beethoven book is like a $150 or a $200 book that I found for like $2 at a thrift store. So it's a beautiful book with illustrations and pictures, and it's jam-packed with information about his life. So I want to pick up more books on the great composers. I want to read more about Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Wagner, all these great names. I want to learn more about them, so I'll probably pick up more books like that in the future. I was just really lucky to find such a beautiful book for $2 at a thrift store. Like I said, make sure you guys are going to thrift stores. There's so many great books to be found there. And then, yeah, some military history books there. I'm keeping them mainly for my children, but I do come back and reference them quite often because I like looking at pictures. I'm a kid at heart. You know, I love reading these thick books, Richard J. Evans' Third Reich trilogy, but I always love coming back and watching some films, documentaries, looking at picture books. You know, I'm a visual learner at heart. So moving on, underneath that shelf, and the second shelf there, we have a couple interesting books. I have a handbook to the Canadian Rockies, one of the most important books that I own. It's actually a complete handbook. It has everything you could want to know: trails, types of species of animals, species of plants. It has mushrooms you can eat. It's literally a perfect guidebook for survival in the Canadian Rockies. So that's a very important book that I own. The pictures in it, I mean, it's got rulers in it. It's got like everything you need to survive in the Canadian Rockies. So I love that book. I have the Wolf Almanac. I have a illustrated encyclopedia of mammals, Mushroom Hunter. I have North American Wildlife. I have a book on biology and philosophy. I have a book on psychology. That's the book that I used when I was at university for the 1 year, and then I dropped out and couple years later signed up for the Peterson Academy. But when I was at my traditional brick and mortar university, I used that psychology textbook for most of my studies. Underneath that, I have the popes. Underneath that, I have 100 photos that changed Canada. Then I have Cathedrals of the World, an absolutely beautiful book. I love flipping through that one. Underneath that, I have a book that my grandpa gave me called The Illustrated Book of Pistols. Next to that, I have Haunted London. Next to that, I have the Small Garden Handbook. I have The Evolving Self, some random psychology book that I found in a little library. I have Constructions of Deviance, which is a sociology book. I have The Essay, Critical Reasoning, Essay Essentials, the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook, and Psychology for Teaching. So yeah, a very random selection of textbooks and atlases, because I'm constantly bringing these types of books in and then they're constantly leaving. So I would go to a thrift store or Value Village or wherever it might be, and if I find a book that looks like this, that's interesting, that I want to pick up, I want to learn more about the wolves. You know, I have a wolf almanac. I don't know why, but if I want to learn more about wolves, I'll just pick that up, keep it in my collection for a bit, flip through it, and then when I'm done with it, I'll swap it. I'll like bring it to the thrift store, donate it, pick up another book. So this collection is constantly rotating. Some of them, like the handbook for the Canadian Rockies, some books I'm gonna keep forever. Probably my psychology textbook I'll keep forever, but other ones like 100 Photos That Changed Canada, North American Wildlife, I might get rid of eventually in the future. I don't know. It depends. Depends on how much space I have. I do want to collect some of these for my children. Growing up, if I had just a room full of picture books and encyclopedias and almanacs, I would be in heaven. So I want to create an atmosphere like that for my children and have lots of engaging books with pictures and graphs and all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah. Very, very random selection of books. I can almost guarantee you that no other soul on the planet has exactly those books in that little cubby there, because they are all over the place. I have a mushroom hunter book, and I have an anxiety and phobia workbook, and then I have another book of the popes, like illustrated history of pistols, like very random books. But like I said, I'm interested in learning about absolutely everything. So this is kind of a rotating door of books here on my little cubby to the left of my bookshelves, or my right, your left, whatever. So before we wrap things up for today, and I know this has been a very long video, so I greatly appreciate all of those who have stuck through to the end. Before we wrap things up today and I bring some books out to show you guys, and before I give you guys those tips and tricks for collecting books, I just want to show you guys very briefly what my reading space looks like. So this is kind of my reading nook. You can see here, this is kind of just towards this side of the screen. Over there's a couch right here, and this is where I sit and read. I have this little reading lamp. It's got a couple different dimmer settings, and yeah, I like reading there. Or I will take the chair that I'm sitting on now, which is usually placed to the other side of the room with this little stool, and yeah, I got those nice fluffy blankets on there, and I like to read from there or from my couch. So I don't know why I'm sharing that, but those are my little reading nooks where I like to read from, or I'll read in my bed, but I'm not showing you guys my bed. And a quick little tease for my audiophiles out there. This is my record collection. So you can see the 5 Kendrick Lamar albums there. The 4 at the bottom that are like in the cubby are covering up the spines of all of my records because I don't want to spoil anything. Eventually I will do a vinyl library tour, but as you can see, I just have those 4 quadrants. I have about 200, maybe 250 records. That's about it. That's all that I've been able to collect so far. Records are very expensive. They're like $40, $50 a pop, and if I collected all the music that I cared about, I would be like $100,000 in debt. So it's going to take time to collect everything that I want to own. I have a lot of hip hop. I have a decent amount of classical music, a couple jazz albums. And yeah, one day I will do a full tour of my vinyl collection. I'll share that with you guys. And maybe one day I'll do a tour of my Blu-ray collection as well. But those are in drawers, so I'll have to find a way to display that for you guys. I don't have them displayed, unfortunately. I have my vinyl on display. I have my books on display. They look beautiful. People come over and they love looking at them, and we get into conversations about art. But unfortunately, I can't display my Blu-rays anywhere. They have to be in drawers. I don't have enough space. But let's show you guys some of my nicest books in my collection now. So yeah, I'm going to just start ripping down books that I think are the most beautiful ones on my shelf, and I'll show you guys a little bit closer. So let me scoot up a little bit here. You guys can also recommend for me any books that you guys think I should collect. Now, there are literally 1,000 books on my wish list right now, so odds are you'll probably name something that I'm already looking at getting, but if you don't, that would be amazing. If you name a book that you think, based on the books that I have on my shelves, you think I should get or you think I should read, and I've never heard of it before, that would be amazing. Not that I think it's impossible. I think you guys are very capable of doing that. I have some very, very smart subscribers who have read much more than I have, so I'm very sure you guys are capable of doing that, but I would love to get some great recommendations from you guys. So I want to give you guys the inspiration of building your own library, showing you guys my books and all that stuff today. So hopefully I can give you guys that, and in return, if you guys can give me some of your favorite recommendations, I think that would be awesome as well. But yeah, I want to show you guys some of the books that I think are the most beautiful on my shelves. So the first one I want to show you guys is the War and Peace collection, which is just absolutely beautiful. I love the side of the box. There's art all over it. And it's collected in 3 volumes. Each volume has these like gold foil covers, and the gold foil on the spines. Each volume, I think you guys can see there, has a bookmark, which is fantastic. I love that feature. Not too much other than that. I mean, there's no illustrations or anything like that that makes it too special, but these Everyman Library books are beautiful. I think they're some of the most high quality hardbacks you can get for the price. They run about $30 to $40 per volume, but it depends on which one you're getting. Like I got Anne Frank and Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Both of them were like $5 or $6 or $7 each. Like they were very, very cheap. They were on sale. And this guy was, I think, regular $100, and I got him for $60 on Amazon. So always check Amazon. They have deals on the Everyman classics all the time. And they're, again, just some of the most beautiful hardcovers you can get for the price. So I'm going to show you guys the two books that I keep by my bedside, which could not be more, they could not be more different or further apart. But the first one is, if I'm feeling in the mood for some horror, I'll read this beautiful Lovecraft collection, which I think just the art on it is just fantastic. It's got like a silk cover to it. It's got it's got a thick bookmark in there too, like a really thick one. And it's got everything. It's got all of his collected works of fiction all in one volume. So before bed, sometimes I'll read that. It's just got the nice cover and it just looks beautiful by my bedside. And the other book, which is completely in the opposite direction, like I said, I would show you guys my Bible, which is made out of goat skin. That's why it's flopping around everywhere. I can literally roll this thing up like that. See, it's goat skin and it'll just flop back into shape. Absolutely beautiful. This one's from Thomas Nelson. I don't have the ribbed spine. It's just kind of the regular spine. It costs me about $200 Canadian, but it's a lifetime investment. I had one friend one time after, it's funny, we were just watching The Lion King, and at the end of it, he was asking me, he's like, should I buy a Bible? And I told him, I said, out of all the things on earth, all of the things that you can spend your money on, pound for pound, the number one thing that you could spend your money on, the pound for pound greatest purchase you can make, in my opinion, is a Bible to me, because it's a spiritual guide. It's not even just a spiritual guide. That's reducing it to something so small. It's the book that's imprinted on your soul, man. You might not even be Christian. You might be Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or whatnot. And for you, that's whatever your holy text is. But, you know, it's the book that's going to help you through life. That's going to help guide you. That's going to help you to make the right decisions, to help you live a happy life. And I've found so much use out of this because I've said it before. I might be Christian, I might be Catholic, but I don't understand this book. Before, when I was an atheist, I didn't understand it because I didn't even read it. I didn't even want to engage with it. I just threw it out the window like, this is bad. This is stupid. This is all made up. But as I start reading it, I find a lot of truth in it. And I find connections to my life, and I find this helps me. But I still, 99% of it, I don't understand. 99% of this book, I don't understand. I don't understand what it means. I don't understand contextually what it means. So I'm going to be working through it for the rest of my life. I might not ever fully understand this book. I don't think anybody does. But that's also the beauty of it. So yeah, I have this beautiful goat skin, gilded edges with 3 bookmarks, 1 red, 2 black. Thomas Nelson King James Bible, which I really should be reading a Douay Rheims Bible because I'm Catholic and that's technically our book, but it's only a couple differences between Douay Rheims and King James. But anyways, I wanted to show you guys those 2 books because those are the 2 books that stay next to my bedside. I have Lovecraft and I have a King James Bible that I think is absolutely beautiful. So let's go over a couple other ones. So a couple more books that I absolutely love the look of, one of which is Watchmen. Beautiful cover. I won't even take the dust jacket off. Oh, maybe I will. Never mind. It just slipped off, so I guess it's coming off. I absolutely love the cover on the actual hardcover itself too, and the dust jacket. Both are beautiful. And From Hell as well. Doesn't have a dust jacket, but also a really nice cover and just a really nice book to read through. This is also the illustrated version. Only the definitive edition is illustrated in color, is what I should say. They're obviously all illustrated because they're comic books, but the original is in black and white. This one has colored illustrations. So I do appreciate that. Then we have, like I said, The Art of War. Absolutely beautiful, and it's all illustrated as well. So I'll give you an example. They have these case studies. I don't know if you guys can see that. Hopefully that picks up on the camera. But they have these case studies of like modern examples. So you can see some pictures of like a tank there. And there's pictures spliced throughout it and modern case studies and examples for each of the rules throughout this book. Sun Tzu's so important, man. Every single man on earth should have a copy of Sun Tzu. Like I just said, that the pound for pound best purchase that you could ever make in your life is a Bible, or just any holy book, I should say, any holy book. But past that, I would say make sure you have Sun Tzu, especially if you're a man. I also wanted to show you guys the Red Book by Carl Jung. It has a bookmark in it and this just beautiful leather. Oh yeah, we got some ASMR there. Also has illustrations, red lettering, blue lettering. Where are the illustrations? I know they're in here somewhere. Maybe my copy doesn't have it. Oh no, here they are. There's some of his mandalas and stuff like that. I don't want to ruin my book, so I'm not going to hold it like that. But yeah, beautiful book too. The Red Book's fantastic. The Black Books I'll collect eventually, but again, they're very pricey. The Black Books are kind of his writings about his dreams and his interpretations of his dreams and talking about mandalas and stuff like that. His Black Books are his kind of personal notebooks, and then they were collapsed down into the Red Book. So you don't really need to read the Black Books unless you're a Jungian completionist, but I definitely am. Eventually I want to own every single thing that Carl Jung ever wrote, including his collected letters, but that'll come someday. That's going to take a long time. I still got to get his collected works, which will take forever. But next up, I wanted to show you guys the Wordsworth Shakespeare. Again, I found this brand new at a thrift store. Never touched. Doesn't have any art on the cover, unfortunately, but they do have bookmarks, which is very nice. I always love having those bookmarks in there, those little ribbons. They make a world's difference. But yeah, I found this absolutely brand new for like $2. Make sure you're going to thrift stores. And then we have the silver gilded edges, again with the bookmark of Grey's Anatomy. And I wish I could open this guy up and show you guys some illustrations. I'll try my best without ruining the frickin' book here, but ooh. Hold on. There you are. There, you can kind of get a glimpse at some of them. Just about every single page has illustrations on it. It's a beautiful book. And I've learned a lot through flipping through it. Obviously, I haven't read the whole thing. It's a pretty thick brick of a book, but eventually I'll get through it. And yeah, there's still a few more books that I want to show you guys, but I did promise that I would show you guys the book that is going to scare my children someday. So on the front, it's just a book about samurai, right? And then on the back, we got, boom! That's definitely going to scare my children someday. I can't wait. But yeah, my little samurai book there. Also kind of neat. So a couple other books I want to show you guys. So first up, I wanted to show you guys these FlexiBound books. They're called FlexiBound because the leather is actually pretty flexible there. And they're just really nice to read. They all have these colored insides. So each one has these illustrations just on the first page there. Or not even the first page. And then Winnie the Pooh, not everyone has this, but Winnie the Pooh has illustrations throughout the entire book. Just about every single page has illustrations of Winnie's or Pooh Bear's adventure. And I also wanted to show you guys some of the Canterbury classics. These also have gilded edges, bookmarks, beautiful. Not every bookmark or bookmark ribbon is the same color, which is cool. So each one kind of has its own unique color. This one, the Divine Comedy, is important to me because it has all of the illustrations by Gustave Doré throughout the entire thing. So sure, you can find a copy of the Divine Comedy that's maybe a bit bigger. Maybe the Gustave Doré illustrations are a bit larger, but the print quality is very good in this book, and I just want to have those illustrations and look at them. They're still bigger than my phone, which is good enough for me, and Gustave Doré, if you don't have his illustrations for Paradise Lost, which my Paradise Lost also has his illustrations, but if you don't have his illustrations for Paradise Lost and the Divine Comedy, I just feel like the work's incomplete. Gustave Doré is, to me, the greatest illustrator of all time. So So then we also have Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which has all of the illustrations from the original illustrator in the magazine. I forget his name here, John Tenniel. And we actually don't have a description of the Mad Hatter in the book, so all of our depictions of the Mad Hatter, which I think is depicted right there, actually come from this man's drawing. So it has all of the original illustrations, and yeah, it has some of the other stories by Lewis Carroll in there as well. This is also my most read book of all time, funny enough. I've listened to the audiobook, at least, of Alice in Wonderland falling asleep over 100 times, probably several hundred times. I never really get past her getting through the small door. But yeah, I constantly listen to that book to fall asleep. I don't know what it is about it. It's just perfect to me. The animated film is also my favorite animated film of all time. Like kind of by far. I just have a very deep connection to it. And yeah, I love Lewis Carroll. So, and probably my most beautiful Canterbury one is the Aesop's Fables. I always say Aesop's Fables. You can see the peacock there on the back. The peacock looks absolutely beautiful. Look at the beautiful peacock feathers, right? These are beautiful books, man. Absolutely gorgeous. So I highly recommend checking those out. I also wanted to show you guys Berserk. So Berserk has the red foil lettering and the embossed logo there. Bookmark. Gotta have it. Gotta have the bookmark, and I'll see if I can actually show you guys any of the art, because a lot of it's very graphic. But I could probably show you guys this one. This is a full 2-page piece of art there. Hopefully that picks up on the camera. Yeah, Vagabond and Berserk. I might even have to give the edge to Berserk, but some of the most beautiful illustrations I've ever seen, like Gustave Doré level illustrations, and just so much detail. I get lost in the pages of Berserk forever, because you just stare at these images so long and just pick up more details. It's almost like a Where's Waldo illustration. But yeah, I picked up a good one, 11. And the art just gets better and better the further you get into the series. It's amazing in book 1. Like, book 1 will blow you away. But then you get to book 2, book 3, book 4, still kind of progressing. And you get to book like 10, 11, 12, and you're like, this is like photorealistic. Like, how did Miura like 600 or 700 pages, and each one is like hyper detailed. Like here's one of a ship. Hold on. Look at this. Look at that. Like, imagine the time and the effort that it takes to hand draw all of that. Oh, what a masterwork of fiction, man. Love Berserk. So much love for Berserk. Can't wait to make more videos on it. And another guy that I can't wait to make videos on is, of course, Lord of the Rings. It's got all the Alan Lee art, so I just want to show you guys what the some of the art looks like and what these look like without their dust jackets. So you can see there, they just got beautiful dust jackets, like really, really nice. But the books are red for Lord of the Rings and green for The Hobbit. Obviously, got the bookmarks. and maps too. Yeah, I forgot about this. We got the maps on the inside there. And I'll try to bring up some Alan Lee artwork. So many beautiful ones in here, especially for this volume. Hold on. I hope this is all picking up on the camera, because, man, these books are beautiful. I think I spent $200 on this pack, but for $50 a book, man, absolutely worth it. Yeah, HarperCollins, it's so heavy. HarperCollins Lord of the Rings box set. There's nicer versions out there. Like, there's like deluxe versions, and there's like the red one on Amazon that's like $300, and it's got all these maps and manuscripts. You can go deep when it comes to collecting Tolkien. I just have the essentials. I don't even have the I can never say it. Similarian. I don't have that. So, okay, just before we wrap up today, I just got a couple more to show you guys. A couple of magazines that are really cool. I promise you guys will find these cool. especially if you're into boxing or photography. But before we get to that, I just want to show you guys some of my childhood books. I don't have all of them. My mom has most of my books growing up. She has my entire collection of Xbox magazines that I collected for years. Even got some of them signed when I went to a video game camp. I learned how to create video games. It's pretty cool. I made a little platformer. I think I still have it. But I met some people who like made BioShock and made Dragon Age, and I was like, cool, like, can you guys sign my books? Like, wow, we've never gotten autograph requests before. But yeah, I used to collect Xbox magazines, hockey news, and Maxim for like a year when I was a teenager. Weird. But anyways, I want to show you guys some of my childhood books. So one is The Hockey Tree. It's going to be a lot of hockey books. I apologize. I don't have my Brady books, unfortunately. I had all of them, but my mom has them all. She has all my childhood books, like almost all of them. But I have a couple here just to keep around for sentimental value. The Moccasin Goalie. So this one is the final game. This is the first book, The Moccasin Goalie. I have that one in hardcover. And this is the second book, I believe, Victory at Paradise Hill. So why do I love these books, The Moccasin Goalies? Well, it's not just because it's a great Canadian story about, a hockey player. The goalie wears moccasins because skates hurt his feet, and he was a really good goalie. But because the people, this was an actual, like, this is a true story. This goalie actually existed, and 3 of my cousins, or my uncles, my grandpa's brothers, played on this team. So there's an image of the team here at the end. My uncle was the captain, and 2 other players that I can't remember who they were. But my mom used to always point them out to me and be like, these are your uncles. So kind of cool that my uncles got to play with the real Moccasin Goalie. Yeah, I used to love those books growing up. And then these books, oh man, A Hero Named How, Wendell Clark and Wayne Gretzky. I think is this the French version? Yeah, it is the French version. Yeah, this one's in French. I had a bunch of French books growing up too, obviously. And then Gretzky's Game. This was my favorite one. It's the one I got my mom to read to me the most. And if I flip through this book, these images just, like, these are the images that I would fall asleep to, listening to my mom's voice read the book. I would stare at these images and fall asleep to them many, many nights. So I have a deep connection to these books, and that's why I keep them kicking around. So yeah, I can't wait to read those to my son one day. And a couple other books that I've collected, not for me, obviously. A hardcover nursery rhymes book, My First Mother Goose nursery rhymes, and Treasury of Virtues. This one has gilded edges, and it's quite a thick book, actually. It doesn't look like it, but it's thick. A lot of beautiful illustrations throughout too. So why do I have these books if I'm not going to read them and they're not for me? Well, they're for my children. I'm thinking about it now, even though I don't have a family, even though I don't even have a girlfriend. I'm already thinking about the books that I want to read to my children, and I'm already picking up books with that in mind. So these are just 3 little hardcover, really nice nursery rhyme books that I've picked up for myself. Unless, for some reason, my sister has a kid before me, I'll give them to her to use until I have my own. But until that day, I'm holding on to those for my future children. So now I want to show you guys those magazines because they're really quite cool. So first up, I have 2 photography books, and oh man, I can't even show you guys the cover. It's got nudity on it. This one, I gotta cover this one up too, and this one. I gotta cover the covers. I'm sorry. There's naked bums on them. But those 2 are magazines from 1952 and 1954. And they're just photography annual books. And some of the photos in there, man, I mean, some of them are explicit, so I can't show you guys. But some of the photos in there, you would not think they were taken in the 50s. Like lenses and definitions that you would just be like, this photo had to be taken in the 90s at least. Like some really, really jaw-dropping, mind-blowing photography in those books. And I'm really lucky to have them because they're my grandfather's, my great-grandfather's, I think. They were my grandma's dads. So very, very cool finds. I'm really glad my grandma gave me those. Another thing that my grandma gave me from my great-grandfather and also my great-great-grandfather, both were boxers in Canada from Montreal, which is where the majority of the Canadian boxing scene comes out of, is Quebec and Montreal. So growing up, my great-grandfather collected Ring magazines. So I have a few of them here. I'm going to show you guys some of them because they're really cool, and they're probably worth a lot of money now, but I'm never going to sell them. And this is only a fraction of the collection. I think the rest of the collection I get when my grandma passes away, which I don't hope is anytime soon, but man, I'd love to flip through the rest of them because Ring magazines from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, not only are they like super sought after today and worth a lot of money, I have no plans on selling these, but they're very, very interesting to flip through because that was kind of the golden age of boxing, was like the 50s to the 70s and arguably the 80s. So here's a couple, some that you guys might recognize. Ali versus Frazier. This one came out in, I think, 1975, this magazine. Very famous fight, probably my favorite fight of all time. Not that one, not the third fight. I like the first one, actually. I'm a big Frazier fan. And then Ali and Foreman, that was from 1974. Also a big fan of Foreman. And then here's a couple like Clay and Frazier. That's got a beautiful cover on it, eh? Wow. Is George Foreman the next champ? That's a really cool one. 105 rounds of mayhem. This came out in 1971. And I have this one, which is, Frazier's on the rise. I have a bunch. I'm not going to show you them all because some of them are in some pretty rough shape, but that's kind of the stack of them that I have right now. So I can't wait to read the rest of them. Really, really cool collection. I would love one day to get them all framed in one big frame and showcase them somewhere in my house because I love the history of boxing. I've watched boxing fights as far back as the 1800s, and I know boxing history. Like not just the 1800s. I know boxing history that goes back to the 17, even late 1600s. So I'm very well read in the history of boxing. It's something that I'm very, very passionate about, along with martial arts. It's probably my favorite martial art. I grew up doing boxing and wrestling primarily, and then I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, Taekwondo, a little bit of karate when I was kind of in my teenage years. So yeah, I love those magazines. They're really, really cool, especially these photography annual magazines. Very, very interesting to flip through. And yeah, I think that's all that I wanted to show you guys today. So that's basically every single book that is in my house. Again, my mom has a lot of my childhood books, and I also collect vinyl and Blu-ray, so I spread myself across 3 different mediums of collection. I could maybe have more books if I didn't collect vinyl or Blu-ray, but I'm very, very proud and very happy with having 600 books at 24 years old. And like I said before, most of you guys probably make more money than me, and I don't have a ton of disposable income, and I still find ways to buy a lot of books. So how exactly do I do that? Well, here are some tips and tricks for building your own library. So how would I go about building a library for the first time? Well, there are a couple things. So I started out with maybe a shelf's worth of books about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe one of these shelves worth, just books that I had picked up from childhood, random assortment. I had some of those physics books, I had some of my martial arts books, and not much. Really, I started from scratch, just about age 19 or 20. So I started a little bit late, actually. So how did I build my library to what it is today? 600 books. How did I do that in 4 years? So I started with, as I mentioned before, going to thrift stores, Value Village, Goodwill, anywhere cheap like that. Sometimes dumps even have places where you can drop off old books. Anywhere like that where books are like $4, $5, $2, and anywhere in that range, go and pick up books from there. There's usually a pretty decent selection. Usually something's going to step out to you. Something's going to jump off the shelves and catch your eye. Pick that up and just start from there. At my Value Village, there's about, 4,000 to 5,000 books. There's quite a few. We have quite a selection at the Value Village in my hometown, but most times that I go there, there's not books that I want. There's a lot of stuff that I would buy if I had unlimited money, but because I don't, there's usually nothing for me to buy there. Now, every once in a while, I'll go there and I'll find 5, 6, maybe even as many as 10 books that I really want to get, and I'll check them all out. And usually with Value Village, they have a buy 4, get 1 free book deal, but I would highly recommend doing that because that's a very cheap way of picking up used books, and usually they're in good shape. Sometimes you'll find books that are annotated, and I know some people don't like that. They don't like scribbles in the margins and people writing all over their books. Totally understandable. I only have maybe 1 or 2 books that I've picked up that do have annotated notes. Usually if I find something like that, I'll just leave the book behind and look for another copy. But for the most part, books aren't annotated and you can just go pick them up. They're usually in good shape. I found some really, really nice hardcover books. I mean, almost brand new, like $50 books for $5. I ended up gifting a bunch of them. Some of them, populate my shelves behind me. So that's a great way to do it. Another great way is little free libraries. Now, they are all over the globe. You can go to freelittlelibrary.org and you can find kind of a map that will locate ones near you. Not all of them are going to be on that map, I will say. Only a couple were on my map in my hometown. Because I have a job where I deliver, I'm constantly driving around my town. I've been cataloging all of the little libraries in my town, and I've counted about between 15 and 20 now, and I have them all logged into my Google Maps. So whenever I have a delivery that's near a little library, I'll stop by, check, see what's there. I'll drop off some books if I have some books to get rid of. And that's a great way to pick up books too, because they're free and they're everywhere. Like every city, every town, most little villages even have some little free little library that you can go pick up. And even across the globe, like books are usually left out, like just on the streets. Like if you go to the Middle East and stuff, they'll just be books on the streets because nobody's going to steal them. So that's why little libraries work. There's kind of a common courtesy thing there where you don't take everything all at once. And if you take something, you try to leave something. Now, if you're just starting out with collecting books, don't worry about leaving a book. Like you don't have to leave a book. There's not going to be anybody by a little library going, hey, you took a book. Did you leave a book? Like nobody's going to police you on that. So just worry about picking up what you need first. And then as you have some extra books, then you can start giving back. So I find myself now I give more books back to little libraries than I take. When I first started collecting books, I was taking a lot more than I was giving. So again, it's not a one-for-one system, right? Take what you need and then when you can, give back. But free little libraries are great because you can find free books that way. And for the most part, I go to Indigo. I have a Plum card, which gives me like 10 or 15% off. And it's like $44 a year, which is, I think that it's worth it because of the discounts. But that's a great way to do it, is just go to Indigo, go to Chapters or wherever your local bookstore chain is. I know in the US you guys have Barnes and Nobles. I wish we had that up here in Canada. But yeah, wherever you like to peruse books and shop around. Sometimes it's nice to, go through shelves, especially with new books. When you go through Value Village or the thrift store, it's like, do I really want to put my hands on all of these books? But you go to Indigo or something, it's a little bit cleaner and you just like to sit there and look at all the books and see what sticks out to you. So Indigo is another great place. Amazon's also fantastic. I would say probably half of the books on my shelves are from thrift stores, Value Village, stuff like that. The other half or probably more than half, probably more like 75% of the books behind me have been just ordered off of Amazon. So that's usually where I get most of my books from. I have an Amazon subscription, so I don't pay for the shipping fee, and it's a really cheap and convenient way to order books straight to my doorstep. And I do that quite often. I haven't had too many issues with books. Only maybe 1 or 2 have come back damaged out of the hundreds that I've ordered. So for the most part, they usually come in good condition, and I usually trust Amazon to deliver my packages perfectly fine. So that's how I go about collecting books, is Amazon, Indigo, the thrift stores, Value Village, Goodwill, and the little libraries. Now, when it comes to reading books or listening to books, if you're more of an audio learner, you like to put things on while you're driving around in the car or working out or whatever you might be doing. Maybe you play video games and you're able to listen to a book while you do that. Sometimes it's hard to concentrate on both, but yeah, if you guys want audiobooks, I highly recommend Audible. I know for a while there I didn't get Audible, and I'm kicking myself now because I wish I got it earlier. But I know that $15 a month price tag can be a little like, and you only get 1 credit, so people think that they could only read 1 book a month or listen to 1 book a month. That's not really the case. Sure, most books on Audible you need a credit for. And yes, you only get 1 credit a month. If you want to buy more, I think it's like $15 for 1, $30 for 3, and then like $50 for 5 or something like that. But I think it's great because there's a lot of books, like hundreds. There are thousands of books, hundreds of which I have saved that are free on Audible if you have a subscription that don't require a credit, and there are lots of good ones. So if you sign up for Audible, or if you already have Audible and you want some recommendations for free books that don't require credits, let me know down below in the comments and give me some sort of some sort of genre for me to poke into, because if you just say, give me some recommendations, I don't know where to go. But if you give me, okay, I want some history books that are on Audible that don't cost a credit, I can give you guys a list. Just let me know down below in the comments, and I'll address that directly to you guys. So Audible's great. The quality of the audiobooks are fantastic. They're the best in the world. They're constantly cranking out new ones. There's usually multiple versions of books, so you can find the audio version that you like the most. And they're great. They're great for tracking your reading. It's great for sharing books. You know, you can share your Audible credits with people. You can gift them to other people. It's just fantastic for so many different reasons. I think Audible is the #1 place to be if you want to listen to audiobooks. Now, Letterboxd is also great if you don't have the money to pay for Audible, but the audiobook quality tends to suffer in Letterboxd. It's very hit or miss. There are some that are fantastic and that are really, really good for a free audiobook. Other times they sound like trash, and honestly, most of the time they sound like trash, like monotone readers, bad audio quality, stuff like that. So Letterboxd isn't great, but it is a resource for free audiobooks. There's also YouTube. So there are hundreds, thousands of free audiobooks on YouTube, from the greatest classics to, like I said, the collected works of Carl Jung. I'll put the channel up on screen right now for that guy. His name's Log, and he's cranking out the collected works of Carl Jung in an audio version that's very well done, like very engaging, very well read. The pronunciation's great. He's not monotone. Very, very good audiobooks. Not like the best ever, but, you know, of that quality where they are really good. They're not like great. You know, there's only a few audiobooks that I've listened to in my life that I think are like great. You know, I listened to Andy Serkis, who plays Gollum in Lord of the Rings. I listened to his audio version of Lord of the Rings, and that was one that I would almost consider great. Or Frederick Davidson's reading of the Gulag Archipelago, I would consider a great reading. So on YouTube, like I said, you can find the Gulag Archipelago complete unabridged. You can find the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire complete and unabridged. You can find the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. You can find so many fantastic audiobooks. You can find Solaris, my favorite sci-fi novel of all time. A really good reading of that is free on YouTube. You can find Roadside Picnic. So many. Those are just a couple that I read recently, but there are so many. St. John and the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul, that's one that I keep listening to, and there's so many. There's so many great audiobooks on YouTube. So again, if you need recommendations, hit me up. I can't throw them up all on screen right now. If I were to show you guys my watch later or my saved playlists, we would be here forever because I have so many saved on my YouTube. So if you guys want recommendations, let me know. Past that, I would also say Internet Archive is another great place to look. Now, you can find books here and audiobooks. So if you're looking to read books, you don't really have any space to collect them, maybe you're in a really small apartment and you just can't collect books, or maybe you don't have the money to collect books, or maybe there's just no bookstores that are near you that carry any good books. That could be the case if you're watching this video. But if you're watching this video and you have an internet connection, you have access to Internet Archive, which is the #1 database in the world for archived media. I would highly recommend perusing through there. Now, are you going to find, you know, copyrighted books, the greatest works of all time on there? No, you're not. Most works are not going to be on there, but there are still thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of texts that are very, very useful. Everything from the writings of Freud to the DSM-5. You know, I have multiple copies of the PDF version of the DSM-5 that I flip through all the time because I'm trying to learn more about psychology and whatnot. And, you know, like I said before, physics textbooks, you know, Paul Dirac's work I found on Internet Archive. So much of what I read, I find off of Internet Archive. The David Irving books, right? They're hard to find because he's a Holocaust denier. Like, let's just be honest. He's a Holocaust denier and he's kind of anti-Semitic, and that's a reason why his books are banned. So if you want to actually read his work for yourself, which is what you should do, you can find it on Internet Archive. So Internet Archive has access to, you know, like I said, thousands of audiobooks, thousands of books. And are you going to find everything that you want to find on there? No, but you'll find a lot of useful stuff. I've found books from the 1800s on architecture on there. I found alchemical books from the 1500s on there. Like, I've found some really out there stuff on Internet Archive, and it's a great resource if you're trying to read more. So highly recommend that as well. There's also stuff like Project Gutenberg and a bunch of other amazing websites out there for finding free books. Another way you could do it is go on Kijiji, go on eBay, find used books online, maybe see if you can trade with people online. You know, if somebody has a book on Kijiji that you really, really want, you can message them, be like, hey, I see that you're into this subject. I actually have a book that you might want. Can we just do a swap instead of me paying you money? So that's a great way to do it. You can join a book club, obviously. I'm not in a book club, but if you really want, you know, that social interaction and you want to talk about your favorite books with other people, that could be a great way to do it as well. And it can also be a great way to borrow books from other people. Make sure you're keeping your eyes on book sales at Barnes & Nobles, Indigo, Chapters, wherever you may shop for books. Keep your eyes on book sales all the time. Look for garage sales. Garage sales in the summer are a great place to find used books, and usually you can barter a little bit and get a bunch for cheap, so that's another great way to collect books. And when it comes to shelving, so this black shelving unit behind me, the big one, was given to me by my mom, and it was her bookshelf before me. She had a lot of books before, but then she kind of bought into this minimalist idea, and she sold all of her books, which always upsets me. Still to this day, that upsets me. But anyways, I have her bookshelf now, and these ones to the sides are all from Amazon. So they're all the same size except for the one that the Vagabond and the Stephen King books, all that was on. It's a little bit wider. I bought that one originally, then I went on Amazon to rebuy it. They didn't have it. It was like completely out of stock. Like they're not making them anymore. So I bought this one here, and I bought it 4 times, and now this one's out of stock and they're not making it anymore. So I'm not buying any more bookshelves from Amazon. They were really cheap. They were like $100 a pop, and I would just build them myself. But if you want to collect bookshelves, I would save up and like go to IKEA and like really like I would save up and like go all out and buy something that's sturdy, something that's going to last a long time. Even something like this is something that you can move. I would almost get a bookshelf that kind of builds into your wall or something like that. There's a bunch of different ways you can go about it. It obviously depends on your budget completely, but yeah, just make sure you're buying sturdy shelves, because one of my shelves here from Amazon cracked. I had my mic stand on it and it cracked, and I had to wood glue it back. So just make sure you're buying quality shelves that will actually hold your books and not damage them by breaking and falling and collapsing. So that's what I would say for bookshelves. Also, when it comes to bookshelves, there's a fantastic app called Bookshelf where you can scan the ISBN codes. So like the little, the barcode on the back of your book, you scan that code and it'll put it into your library. Or you can scan the spines, but I tend to find that feature doesn't work as well. And you can catalog your books that way. So I have all of my books kind of cataloged in my phone here. And in each one, I can kind of see the date that the book came out. I can see reviews from other people who have this app. I can give a 5-star rating for the book myself with half stars. That's always nice. You can track. So each book has the page number and a little slider bar, and you can track exactly what page you're on. You can track when you started reading the book, when you ended the book. You can put labels on if it's a series or if it's a volume in a series. You can put notes on when you purchased it, if you sold it or donated it. And that's not even any of the advanced features like flashcards, quotes, advanced notes. Like, this app is amazing, and I think the subscription isn't too pricey. I'm surprised I don't have it myself, but you can also filter by books you've read, books you haven't read yet, books you've started. You can search by series, borrowed books, purchased books, sold books. Yeah, I mean, you could search through your books in so many different ways. You can sort by title, author, page count, published date, your rating. You can search by the price of the book. Like, it is such a perfect app for cataloging all of your books. You can create wish lists. Like, it's fantastic. It's like the book or the app that you should have if you're a book collector. It's absolutely fantastic. So I highly recommend that as well. And I guess I'll give you guys just a couple tips for reading more, like to motivate yourself to read more, because I know a lot of people, they kind of struggle with that, especially young men. So many more young women read than young men, and it's not good. We need to change that. So here are a couple tips and tricks that I have for reading more. So the first tip is just read what interests you. Like, that's the basic thing. When people say like, oh, I don't like to read, reading doesn't interest me, I'm like, that's only said by people who don't pick up books, and you're not going to enjoy reading unless you pick up a book and try it. So there are millions of books. There are literally over 500 million books on the planet, most of which you will never read. You'll never have even the access to read them because there might be only a couple copies in the world. And most of them suck. Like, most books are trash. It's the same thing with music. Most music sucks. That's why most music's not on the radio. Only the popular stuff is. Only the quality stuff is, right? There's a lot of bad art out there. So you don't have to worry about reading every single book on planet Earth. Just read what interests you. Read what pops out to you. If you're interested in anything on Earth, which everybody is. I've never met anybody in the history of the world who doesn't have at least something that interests them, good or bad. Something's going to interest you. Something's going to call you. And whatever that is, there's going to be a book on that thing. And there's going to be good books on that thing and bad books on that thing. So look up lists. I consume about 10 to 15 lists a day. I'm constantly searching up lists. I get ChatGPT to make lists. I look up lists on Ranker, WatchMojo. Everywhere I can find lists, I look at lists to kind of organize in which direction do I want to go and in which order do I want to consume content. I usually want to consume what's best first, and I'll leave what's kind of mediocre for if I ever get around to it, because I'm interested in absolutely everything. I don't think I'll ever get around to the mediocre stuff, maybe some of it. I'm not saying that I don't like mediocre art. I obviously have my soft spots for some even bad art at times, but I try to consume what's best first. So consume lists, try to organize what you want to read, whatever pops out to you, whatever stands out to you. Pick that up. The subjects that interest you the most are the subjects that you should be reading about, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, science, or art. Does not matter what it is, as long as it interests you. And then just replace whatever bad habits you have in your life with reading. So I find that if I go to bed and I sit on YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels and I just flip through and flip through and flip through, not only do I not feel good, I mean, I'm getting somewhat of a dopamine hit, but really I don't feel good in my soul. But not only do I not feel good, but I don't get tired. I just keep staying up. I keep staying stimulated, and then I find myself, oh, it's 1 a.m. I'll just watch a couple more reels. Oh, it's 2 a.m. I'll just watch a couple more reels. Oh, it's 3 a.m. Oh, now my sleep schedule is screwed, and I'm going to be tired in the morning and then cranky, and my life just got worse because I just wasted time getting cheap little dopamine hits watching YouTube Shorts and Reels. So I try not to do that anymore. Instead, I'll go to an audiobook and I'll just play that just for 5 minutes. I'll tell myself I can watch as many Reels as I want as long as I get 5 minutes into a book. And usually by the end of those 5 minutes, I just want to keep reading, or I'm already tired enough to go to bed. Seriously, after 5 minutes, if I'm tired enough and it's the end of the day, 5 minutes is enough to put me to bed. It's like what I was saying earlier. I read Alice in Wonderland more than any other book ever. Even though I haven't gotten past like the first 3 chapters, I've obviously read the whole book before, but every time that I put the audiobook on, I get like down the rabbit hole. She starts drinking the potions and eating the cookies, and then like I'm asleep. So reading will put your mind to sleep very, very quickly. And if you want to fix your sleep schedule, if you want to get more time in your life, stop watching the reels and the shorts and the even like TV and stuff like that. Like, try to cut that down. I know it's tempting to click the next episode button, but if you can just take 5 minutes to engage with a book, I promise you by the end of those 5 minutes, you'll either be tired enough to go to bed or you'll want to read more. So that's one way that I'll do it. Another way is just keep a book on you at all times. You know, I have large books that I can't take around. I'm not going to be taking Berserk outside of my apartment. I love those books too much, and I want to keep them in good shape. And I won't even lend them out to people. You can't even borrow some of my books. But other books I don't really care about. They're either secondhand copies or they're smaller, a little bit more portable. So I'll take them around. So I actually didn't show you guys all of my books today because I have 4 or 5 books in the glove box of my car. I think I have 6 or 7 actually. I have in the dash or in the cup holder in the side of my door, I have like a zip up copy of the King James version. So I have a zip up copy of the Bible. It's got like gilded edges and a bookmark. Really nice version. It's on Amazon for like $20. But I have that. So I have a copy of Pocket Bible. And then in my glove box, I have a couple books. So I have Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, a little small red gilded version of it with a bookmark. Again, I love my bookmarks. I have a German version of Old Man and the Sea. So that's fun to read sometimes to brush up on my German. I have, what else do I have in there? Hagakure, which is some samurai philosophy. I also have a copy of 1984. And I have a book of poetry by Wordsworth. So I have those. They're just very small pocketbooks. They're all the pocketbooks that I own, just shoved into my glove box. And whenever I'm sitting around waiting for an order or whatever it might be, if I'm waiting on somebody anywhere in life, or if I'm going to some event that I'm not really interested in, I'll bring one of those pocketbooks and I'll just read that way. So keep books on you and make sure that you're reading at the end of the night. Try to read before bed. Again, that's a great way to put yourself to sleep, and it's a great way to get that reading done. I would try to dedicate at least 5 minutes a day to reading. Again, once you get 5 minutes in, you tend to want to read for half an hour anyways. And yeah, just make sure that you're reading every single day. Try to read something new. Again, if you listen to something on audiobook, that counts as reading. You know, you don't have to be like, oh man, I only listened to audiobooks today, and I feel like that's more like a podcast than a book. And in some ways it is, but it's still a book. It's still an audio version of a concentrated book. So I still count it as reading. And yeah, I want to encourage more young people to read. I want to encourage more young people to build their own libraries and to pass them down the generations, pass them down to your children. And yeah, I hope this video inspired some people to do that. So I think that's all that I have for today, guys. Oh, I guess one last thing before we wrap up. One last tip is just setting reading goals, which again, that should be obvious, but I track my reading. I track how many pages I've read, how many books I've read in a year. And for the past 4 or 5 years now, I've read between 100 and 150 books in a year in each of those years. So I made a New Year's resolution one year in front of my whole family that I was going to read 100 books in a year. And because I made that in front of my whole family, I wanted to live up to it. I lived up to it. Turns out it wasn't as difficult as I thought with audiobooks and some of the tips and tricks that I laid out for you guys just now. Wasn't that difficult. So I bumped it up to 150 the next year. The year after that didn't quite hit 150. So I've been in between 100 and 150 books a year since I started collecting books probably 4 or 5 years ago now. So yeah, just setting reading goals is another tip. But that's everything that I have for today. I've now shown you guys every single book that I have in my collection. I talked a little bit about each one. I showed you guys in a little bit more detail what each of those what my most beautiful books looked like, and yeah, hopefully I gave you guys some tips and tricks for yourself for reading more and collecting books. And yeah, I hope this video inspires somebody, and if you guys have any recommendations, definitely let me know down below in the comments. And yeah, if you guys love reading, definitely subscribe to the channel, because I'll have, like I said, why you should read videos coming out. I'll have book analysis videos. I'll have book list videos. There'll be tons of book content on this channel in the future. So definitely subscribe, share with your friends. Don't forget to like the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, it means the world to me. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.